It's 121 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We are looking at a fresh bout of instability for the U.S. stock market on this Friday. Right now, the S&P is down 9. Has been a choppy session, down by 0.2%. We've got the Dow up 34 on the Dow, gain there of just about 0.1%. While the Nasdaq Composite Index down 85 now, drop there of 0.4%. We are seeing a slide in chip makers. Also, a pile of options are expiring today, and that's threatening to trigger sudden price swings. The 10-year at 4.36% with a 2-year 3.89%. Gold, little changed on today. We'll call it flat at 33.71 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.2%. Now back below 75 a barrel, 74.99. The American College of Cardiology is recommending that weight loss drugs be used earlier to prevent heart disease, particularly for obese patients, as exercise and diet may not be enough. And Aflac has announced a cybersecurity breach that may have given unauthorized access to customers' personal information, including Social Security numbers, health, and claims data. Recapping, S&P down 9, down 0.2%. Balance of power continues right now, and back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet on a triple witching Friday. Charlie, thank you so much, live from World Headquarters in New York. The voice of Wall Street and the New York subway, in fact. Great to have you with us on the Friday edition of Balance of Power. Here on Bloomberg TV and radio, on the Bloomberg Professional app, Bloomberg Originals, and on YouTube, where you can find us right now by searching Bloomberg Business News Live. Waiting for decisions to come from the White House on any number of matters. Yes, that includes tariffs. 9th of July is the deadline. Remember, the clock was ticking on a 90-day extension. We now have a 2-week extension, effectively, on talks with Iran. And we're just getting headlines now, in fact, on talks that were held today in Geneva, not with the U.S., but Iran's foreign minister sitting down with the E3, leaders from Britain, France, Germany, to talk about potentially finding a diplomatic solution here. And the UK's foreign minister says that he seeks more Iran contact, urging Tehran to talk to the U.S. David Lammy suggesting optimism after he met with Marco Rubio and Steve Witkoff at the White House yesterday, putting on X, a window now exists within the next 2 weeks to achieve a diplomatic solution. There you see it on Bloomberg TV, optimism, to suggest that Steve Witkoff or Secretary Rubio might end up at a negotiating table with Iran has yet to be seen. Donald Trump, just as recently as Wednesday, suggesting that he had not made up his mind and that no one knows what he wants to do when it comes to potential U.S. involvement here, offensive military involvement against Iran. Here he is.
You don't know that I'm going to even do it. You don't know. I may do it. I may not do it. I mean, nobody knows what I'm going to do. I can tell you this, that Iran's got a lot of trouble.
Iran's got a lot of trouble. As we assemble our political panel. Bloomberg Politics contributor, Republican strategist Rick Davis is here, partner at Stone Court Capital, alongside Democratic strategist Matt Bennett from Third Way. Gentlemen, great to have both of you with us here. Rick, I don't know what it is about 2 weeks that the president is always reaching for when he needs some breathing room, but you wonder if this has a lot to do with MAGA. Having lunched with Steve Bannon yesterday, MAGA urging for restraint in this case. Is he trying to show his most faithful supporters that he gave diplomacy every chance?
Yeah, this is something that is really fascinating about this presidency, is his own supporters don't mind criticizing him about decisions they believe might be in violation of the promises he made on the campaign trail. And this is prima facie evidence of that. And so, it's no question in the back of his mind. I think it's evidence that Steve Bannon going over to the White House, one of his firmest critics on this issue of opening up a military front in Iran, is gotten to him. Look, I think it's an interesting device that Donald Trump uses when he feels under pressure. He kicks the can, right? He doesn't hunker down and try to make a decision. He just delays for time. And on its own, it's a strategic idea. The downside to Donald Trump is it just leaves more lobbying room, more public and private negotiations to take place within his own ruling coalition, if you want to call it that, before you ever get to the point of figuring out, okay, what are we going to do to Iran to stop them from being able to enrich uranium. So, I mean, it's I think we're going to be up for at least the next 10 days, a incredibly troublesome process because Donald Trump likes to think out loud. And that's going to throw a lot of different curveballs into this system.
What is it about 2 weeks, Matt Bennett? Sean McCreesh in the New York Times this morning suggesting that it is a slippery thing when it comes to Trump. Not a measurement of time so much as a placeholder. Tax plans, he writes, healthcare policies, evidence of conspiracy theories he claimed were true, the fight against ISIS, the opening of some coal mines, infrastructure plans, all at one point or another were riddles he promised to solve in about 2 weeks. So what takes place in 2 weeks this time?
It's a really good question. As somebody pointed out, Jimmy Kimmel, I think, said he's the guy that loved to say you're fired, and instead he's giving everybody 2 weeks notice on everything. But it never sticks. I mean, the 2 weeks that he wanted to roll out his healthcare plan was 5 years ago, and we're still waiting. So 2 weeks is meaningless. And I think to Rick's point, the problem here is that now everybody and their brother is going to be lobbying him from their own weirdo points of view in his coalition. I mean, think about how he fired most of the members of his National Security Council, including the leader of it, because Laura Loomer, probably the most extreme big influencer in the MAGA world, she is completely crazy. She came into the White House and said he should fire a bunch of people, so he did. God knows whether I know she's lobbying him on the Iran thing. Whether he's listening or not, who knows? But this is not good news for America.
Well, I don't know what's going to come from 2 weeks here, Rick, but we also should allow for other logistical concerns, right? Donald Trump is talking to Benjamin Netanyahu, and if Israel can take care of this on its own, I suspect he would prefer that. And I wonder your thoughts on what deliberations might be taking place inside the Pentagon here with your connections to the defense space, knowing that Israel is considering sending special forces underground into Fordo, that a power outage or another act of sabotage could eliminate these centrifuges, not unlike American B-2s. How do you square all these ideas?
Yeah, look, there are an enormous number of moving parts that are both on our side and on Israel's side. The Nimitz has not gotten on position yet. They'll arrive this weekend. Yep. We've called up the Eisenhower, a third carrier group, to be put into the Med, and they don't get there until next week. You've mentioned that the Israelis are flexing for ground operations, which they've done successfully in the past, most recently just earlier this week. And the U.S. is flexing for more military capacity and moving our civilian personnel out of embassies right now in the region. So there is a lot happening while the president makes a final decision as to whether or not to use U.S. forces to strike Fordo. And by the way, it does not limit Israel at all doing what they're doing. If anything, we heard it today from the Iranian foreign minister that how are we supposed to negotiate a peace deal if Israel is attacking us every day? And I think most people who watch this space closely would agree the only reason they're willing to talk about peace is because Israel is hurting them every day. And so I think all of this sort of lends some credibility to Donald Trump giving these kinds of 2 week notices that we'll have all our facilities in place. The Defense Department has lots of assets. They're moving to the region. And the president then can still make a decision to go for peace and not for striking, or vice versa. So it doesn't take any options away from the president, but it makes it very clear to the Iranians today that with this kind of firepower, both from the Israeli side and the U.S. side, within 1 week, it's going to be very difficult for them to say anything but uncle.
This is a remarkable moment here, certainly militarily an inflection point. This Operation Pressure Cooker, Matt, has got to be noticed by Iran. There's a lot of questions, though, about the so-called day after. This is the big MAGA question as framed by Steve Bannon or by Tucker Carlson in that interview with Ted Cruz that went on for 2 hours. How worried is Donald Trump about the day after?
You better be pretty worried. I mean, we have seen this movie before. Same region, accusations that WMDs were being developed. We moved in big way, and it went very, very badly, as you may recall, with the Iraq War. So he better worry about that. And I think, Joe, as you and I have discussed on your show before, it isn't just up to the United States as to whether this expands into something more than just a couple of big bombs dropped on Fordo. If we do that, maybe even if we don't, it's up to the Iranians as to whether they want to attack our forces in the region, whether they want to use cyber attacks against the United States, whether they want to use sleeper agents in the United States. They have some agency here too, not a ton. I mean, they don't have any air defense. There's a lot they can't do, but they could widen this conflict even if we didn't want to. So I think it is very, very dangerous. And Trump, as Rick said earlier, Trump was elected on the promise that he's not going to get us entangled in foreign wars. He may not intend to do that, but he could stumble into it as President Bush did, and he's well aware of that.
Rick, you just very effectively described the growing footprint of military hardware, U.S. military hardware, our presence in the region. When you step back and consider the possibilities, what would happen if Iran, in fact, attacked U.S. forces in a world that Matt Bennett is describing?
Yeah, look, I mean, we would react with proportion at a time and place of our choosing. That's one of my favorite terms that the military uses to keep everything on their schedule, not our opponents. And in this case, I would have no doubt that the Defense Department has plans that would incapacitate Iran's ability to launch missiles. You've seen already a lot of that capability degraded from the Israeli attacks, not just on military sites, but where they also manufacture these weapons, and even the power systems that fuel the launch system. So we know as much as Israel does about what the Iranian vulnerabilities are, and we would take advantage of those Iranian vulnerabilities. So it is no doubt in my mind that this would not be a one and done. If we decide to launch a strike on Fedor and think of it as a way of incapacitating a nuclear program with Iran, and Iran does nothing, well, that's a scenario that we could all get used to quick. If then Iran goes after our troops, our facilities in the region, it could pose itself into a much more devastating outcome, both for the United States, but also for Iran. And I would remind everybody, Iran is already attacking us cyber systems all the time. Iran has assassination squads in the United States going after people like John Bolton, who assisted in the assassination of Soleimani. I mean, like, these aren't people who have been behaving themselves and now have the capacity to hurt us. They have been hurting us for decades, and now they are paying a price.
Rick Davis and Matt Bennett. Great panel. Rick, thank you so much, and Matt, have a great weekend. I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg.
1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got stocks at the low of the session right now. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all in the red. The S&P down 26, drop there of 0.4%. A closely watched gauge of chip stocks down 1%, while the S&P 500 wavers as the Wall Street Journal reports that the U.S. may revoke waivers for allies with semiconductor plants in China. The Dow now down by 63, drop there of 0.1%. Again, key takeaway at this hour, the S&P down 25, worst level of the session, down 0.4. The NASDAQ down 155, down by 0.8%. 10-year, 4.36%. The 2-year, 3.89%. Gold, little changed on the day, down under 0.1% now, 33.68 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude also little changed at 75.18 a barrel, up under 0.1%. After earnings, Kroger shares, they are surging 9.1%. Kroger's sales surpassed expectations in the latest quarter. CarMax shares after earnings up now by 6.7%. And Darden Restaurants, that is the parent of the Olive Garden and Ruth's Chris Steakhouse chains. Right now we got Darden down by 0.2%. Again, recapping, S&P down 24, drop there of 0.4%. Balance of power continues right now. And back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, and here he is, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Live from New York. Charlie Pellet watching Wall Street for us here as we talk politics in Washington. And while there's not a lot going on in town today, we're waiting to hear from the president on Iran. You've got the House on recess. It's pretty quiet in the nation's capital. There's some important work that's kicking off here in the United States Senate. You hear us talk about the bird bath, the bird droppings, the things that might not end up in the bill. It's getting going now on the Senate Finance Committee's portion of the president's big, beautiful bill. This is the tough stuff in many cases, the controversial tax-related stuff, the Medicaid situation. And we're going to get into it now with somebody who's been on the other side of the bird bath. With our eyes on the Senate, we bring in from the House, Patrick McHenry. Of course, former chair, House Financial Services Committee, former Speaker Pro Temp, Bloomberg contributor. Nice to see you.
Honored to be back.
It's like just me and you in the Capitol today.
This is fantastic.
Quiet
this
around
is like
here.
the place to ourselves.
Well, yeah, and thank you for being here. So there are questions about what's going to make the cut. I'm going to play you Mike Lawler in a minute because he talked to us on Wednesday about holding the line on salt. There's a lot of stuff up in the air here. The parliamentarian will then have a say. Is there anything beginning with the current policy baseline that could be massively disrupted this weekend?
Well, I think the current policy baseline is the big enchilada,
Yep.
And the major decision, and there'll be a waterfall off of that.
Okay.
So we're going through a set of procedures that every House member hates. So we send over a bill that we think conforms with reconciliation, the law that governs the reconciliation process. Mm-hmm. It really doesn't have any bearing on the House because we work as a majoritarian institution on a daily, weekly basis. That's what we do. Yeah. Or they do now, I should say. And then in the Senate, it's complex because you have this cloture threshold. You have these higher standards to do anything. Mm-hmm. The one example of them having a 50+1 margin for policy that affects budgeting occurs through the reconciliation process. The Senate procedure here puts the power to make that decision in the parliamentarian, and with only very rare historic moments has the parliamentarian been overruled.
Aaron McDonough, is that if I remember? Is this a very unpopular person?
Highly unpopular.
Someone you see in the elevator?
Highly unpopular, but also the most popular,
and
right?
Most powerful.
Most powerful. So this whole process
hasn't paid for a drink in years.
No, and this process is one that is deeply adjudicated, and the attempt here is to be balanced. Balanced over the 10 and 20 and 30-year basis, not just the 2-year Congress basis. Yeah. So a lot will be pulled out of this bill, like it always is in every reconciliation package that has happened over the last 20 years.
How predictable is that typically?
It is not predictable.
Okay.
It is not predictable because there are a lot of performative acts going in, a lot of bravado of what the policymaker or those that oppose the policy think is the right outcome, which is obviously their perspective, not anything connected with the rules. It's their whims, their wishes. So what comes out of this is less of a bill than started. That is historic. That is natural for this process. And it will be more frustrating to House members what falls out than what stays in. which is why you're seeing House members opine about every step of the way, as they should.
So current policy baseline gut check, the Senate knows this is coming. Surely they've been in touch. That would really disrupt this bill. Does it stay in?
I think it stays in.
Okay.
I think it stays in. But these things are very hard to predict. But I think, on balance, I think it stays in. That also changes the score for certain policymakers. It doesn't change the score for Wall Street. Wall Street looks at this and says, Republicans haven't done enough to reduce the debt and deficit. Haven't turned the tide on our annual deficits. Haven't done anything to address the national debt. And that is problematic. This is a bill that is by and large a tax extension of current code. When you take that out, the deficit reduction package is a very serious one. It's not as large as the debt reduction package we had 2 years ago under divided government. It's not as large as the divided government debt reduction or deficit reduction package we had under President Obama with Republican leadership in the House. So it is large. It is not a standout in historic terms. The larger ones were done in a large bipartisan package.
When you consider deal breakers here, next in line might be SALT, which is amazing to me that it's come to this. But there was a deal, of course, in the House. If you watch or listen to Bloomberg, you already know it's a big story around here, $40,000. It came out of the Ways and Means Committee at 30. A lot of people thought maybe that's where this would settle down. Senate kicks it back at 10. We don't know anything about SALT on the Senate side.
Cares not at all. Whit.
We've learned why. Republican senators aren't in blue states where this matters. Mike Lawler is. Your former colleague talked to us about this on Wednesday because the position of the SALT caucus is over my dead body, right? I'm a no vote, not a dime less. Here's Mike Lawler on Bloomberg.
The Senate needs to recognize they can make changes, they can enter into negotiations, but the fact is you need 218 votes to pass this in the House, and there is not a chance in hell that this bill will pass at $10,000, let alone less than $40,000. I guess people, want to try and call our bluff. They tried that in the House. They tried to jam us, and we didn't fold.
Not a chance in hell. This has turned out to be one of the most influential groups in the House because Donald Trump can't primary Representative Lawler with a MAGA candidate, can he?
Well, also, these candidates can't go back and campaign as a Republican that they raise their constituents' taxes, which is effectively what this is.
But if he votes no on the bill, he will raise
Well, no,
taxes.
But if he votes no on the bill, there is no bill that goes to the president's desk.
Therefore, Trump tax cuts expire and everyone gets a hike, though.
Well, but this is also June. We're still in the month of June. There's a lot of runway here before now and the end of the year. The president wants this bill as quickly as possible to his desk. The end of July has been sort of the natural deadline. July 4th is what the White House is saying.
Yes.
I think if you see the Senate pass this bill by this time next week, or they're in the final landing path for the final vote on this by this time next week, the House will be kept into session. It will be kept in session by President Trump and Speaker Johnson, and the demand will be to take it up and pass it to the president's desk.
They'll be voting on July 3rd.
Which means I think the Senate will come to a compromise that the SALT caucus will agree to. That is above $10,000. It may not be perfectly $40,000. It may not be every stitch of the policy of the House. But the Senate will have to come to terms to fix the House's problem if the president's going to get a bill to the desk before July 4th.
What happens in the meantime to the Ron Johnsons, Rand Pauls? Does the president write them off? He can lose a couple, right?
You can lose a couple, but Rand Paul's taken himself out of the game. He says he will not vote for it because it includes the debt ceiling increase. He's out. But there's still a pathway without Ron Johnson that means you actually have a deficit reduction package and a clean tax extension. There's a lot of wiggle room that all these senators are providing for themselves, save Rand Paul. And I think you're going to see policymakers try to move these policies to a sufficient happy point for them that they can vote for it. They want to be for this. They do not want to stand in favor of a tax increase. And there's a lot of pressure that the president is bringing to bear.
I want to ask you about crypto because he could put some pressure on House members on this too, right? The Genius Act I've thought about you in that past. I wondered what you were thinking because that was a pretty big deal. And with all the noise about Iran and everything happening, which is clearly critical and very important, it might not have gotten the coverage that it deserved. But I'll tell you what, we sat here in this very room on the same program, talked to Senator Elizabeth Warren and Senator Also Brooks, two Democrats who have very different takes on this. Senator Also Brooks is trying to make the case for crypto that it is about more than criminals. Will the Elizabeth Warrens in the House accept that argument?
No, I think what you're talking about is a serious policymaker who's new to the Senate and somebody who has created an avenue to be a gadfly on policy rather than a participant in policymaking. And so the substantive issue here is that we have, for things that are called a stable coin, no federal definition of what that is, only state regulation of stable coins. We have no requirement for us to have audited financials, no federal oversight of this substantial product that is really rising in use and utility, with hundreds of billions of dollars of flow through stable coins now and no federal regulatory regime. So you would think that the party that favors more regulation generally, the Democratic Party, would say we need to have some say here. You had 68 votes in the Senate to pass the Genius Act to provide a federal regulatory perimeter on things called stable coins. It's a simple bill, frankly, that we passed out of committee 2 years ago. At this time out of the House of Representatives.
Is the fear that Donald Trump runs wild, making money on crypto, it doesn't crack down on Trump enough, or is the fear that this unlocks the Clarity Act, the new FIT bill that brings us to bear when it comes to Bitcoin?
I think you have partisan Democratic senators and in the House
who in some cases previously approved of this legislation.
Yes, and the optics around President Trump's family being engaged in crypto has told them that they're out, and it's really a hot button political issue that they don't want to touch. These bills address those issues. The question of public office holders owning crypto can be addressed separately in regulation and legislation. It shouldn't stop a 1933 and 1934 Securities and Securities Exchange Act type of legislation for crypto to take hold. It shouldn't stop us regulating financial products at the federal level because you see what Democratic members see as bad actors within the Trump family on this stuff. That shouldn't inhibit legislation. But it did pull some senators off or give them justification to be a no because they're already anti-crypto. The big news here, though, is it is a major bipartisan milestone for the Senate to take up crypto legislation, number one. And number two, the Senate Banking Committee has produced now its second piece of major legislation since the financial crisis. Since Dodd-Frank, the Senate Banking Committee has passed Senate Bill 2155, which was a revision to Dodd-Frank, modest in nature, that became law, and now stablecoins. They've done two major things since Dodd-Frank passage. I think that we should herald because it's serious policymaking, a serious undertaking from a serious committee, and we should welcome that as a functioning piece of government and commend everybody who wanted to participate and to get to a good outcome.
Well, it did take Democrats to pass it in the Senate. We'll see what happens on the House side. I want to ask you about Iran in our remaining couple of moments here because the president's facing a major decision, and you've been involved or were in your time as a member of Congress in debates around authorizing use of force. In some cases, they were bent into pretzels to keep them working in places like Iran and Afghanistan. At what point will Congress need to have a say in something if the president decides to take action?
Well, it depends how significant the action is.
This is 30 to 60 days, typically. Is there more to it than that?
It is, and it depends how lasting this action is. If you're talking about regime change, I think that is a significant shaker. That's why you see skepticism on MAGA loyalists that want us pulling back from the world. And they're saying, do not get into the question of regime change. We saw what happened in Iraq. We need to learn our lessons. Now, the question is, what are those measures that we can take to stop Iran's nuclear program? Can we be of aid and assistance to Israel, like it appears that we currently are? Should we ramp that up a degree or 50 degrees, depending on your perspective? There is a divide among President Trump's loyalists on this, on what is the right approach. I think what we're going to see here is a Trump doctrine that comes as a result of that, that is neither isolationist nor fully engaged in the international community.
Fascinating. You think we find out in less than 2 weeks?
I think we find out within days.
Fascinating. Always great to see you. Patrick McHenry, Bloomberg Politics contributor, of course, former chair of the House Financial Services Committee, a man who's held the gavel as former Speaker Pro Tem. Great to see you. Thank you so much, as always. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. We'll meet you back here on the 5 p.m. late edition of Balance of Power.
is Bloomberg Business Week Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week Daily with Carol Masser and Tim Stenivek, live on Bloomberg Radio, television, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals.
And a very good afternoon, everyone. Happy Friday. It is Friday, June 20th, 2025. Carol Masser, Tim Stenivek, live here at Bloomberg headquarters in New York City. Stocks mostly lower today. There is, again, another day where maybe the moves aren't dramatic, but there's a lot going on behind the scenes.
There is, yeah. Triple witching. Volume's actually high for the day after a holiday, for a holiday shortened trading week. We do see the NASDAQ down about 0.6%, the S&P 500 lower by about 0.3%. Charlie Pellet is going to give us an update, all the numbers, in just a minute.
Yep. We've also got speculation over a possible rate cut in July. That has certainly played out, at least earlier in the equity session. And the big one, what's next for U.S. involvement when it comes to Israel and Iran? That war. That is definitely our focus today. So we're going to get into it. We're going to head to Jerusalem, get the latest on the war, an update from there. Plus, Tim, he was at the G7 in this past week. He's back in D.C., or Nick Wadhams, on the White House's next move when it comes to Iran.
Also, the Islamic Republic's nuclear capabilities. We're going to do a reality check on that. And speaking of reality checks, what is life like right now in Iran, and how has it changed over the last 15 years or so? We're going to go with the details on that.
All right, big focus for us certainly on the Middle East on this hour of Bloomberg Business Week Daily. Hey, let's get to the trade. Tim talked about it. Let's get to Charlie Pellet and see what's going on. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much. Happy Friday with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, not so happy. All in the red right now with the S&P down 16, 59.63 where we stand, down 0.3%. Investors wrapping up a jittery week with losses in stocks, gains in bonds, as traders weigh comments from European officials after talks aimed at de-escalating the week-long war between Israel and Iran ended in Geneva. Iran, meanwhile, quoted as saying it sees serious and respectful atmosphere at those Europe talks. The S&P, as I mentioned, down 0.3%, now at 59.64. The Dow down 32, down 0.1%. NASDAQ down 107, a decline there of 0.5%. The 10-year 4.37%, with a 2-year 3.90%. Spot gold flat on the day right now, down just about 0.1%, 33.67 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude 75.24 for a barrel of WTI. Bitcoin right now down 1%, 103,205 on Bitcoin. Earnings news: Kroger sales surpassed expectations during the latest quarter. Shares of the supermarket chain up 8.9%. CarMax after earnings up 6.1%. And Darden Restaurants, that is the parent of the Olive Garden chain, Darden down 0.2%. Recapping S&P down 0.3. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, got it, Charlie. Thank you so much. You are up to date on the trade on this Friday. Talks aimed at de-escalating the week-long war between Israel and Iran got underway in Geneva today. This is after U.S. President Donald Trump signaled he would give diplomacy a chance before deciding whether to intervene militarily. Now, oil prices did fall following a report from Reuters earlier that Iran is ready to discuss limitations on uranium enrichment, but will not consider stopping entirely while it's under military attacks. And Tim, we know that these attacks have continued.
Yeah, for the latest, let's head to Jerusalem, where we find Bloomberg News reporter Dan Williams joining us from there just after 9 p.m. in the evening. Dan, when we spoke to you earlier this week, you were in London. You told us that you weren't expecting to be in London that long. You've obviously made it back to Jerusalem. The airport does not have normal traffic right now. Difficult to get in and out. Just give us an idea of how you made it back from London to Jerusalem.
Hi, good afternoon. Yes, as you noted, the airspace is closed around Israel, not just Israel. Other countries in the Middle East are also taking that precaution, given how busy the airspace is with warplanes and missiles going back and forth. The Israelis have started opening up the skies, but only for select returning Israelis. There are some 100 to 150,000 of them abroad. So basically, as a workaround, I was sent back overland through Egypt, flown from London to Sharm el-Sheikh, which is a famous resort on the Red Sea in the Egyptian Sinai. It added a number of hours to the trip. Overall, a pleasant trip. There are a few hiccups there, but that's pretty much what we're seeing across the board. Overland travel through Egypt, through Jordan, back and forth by those who are unable or unwilling, perhaps, to take what limited air options there are right now.
Sounds pretty difficult and pretty tricky. Having gotten back home, I'm assuming it was pretty difficult to see some of what was around you, but tell us about what is life like in Jerusalem today?
Well, since you asked, I'll share with you. A couple hours ago, we actually had sirens across the country. There was a volley of some 30 missiles from Iran. They set off as a precaution the Israeli sirens everywhere, and I got to join my family in the communal bomb shelter, a place I hadn't experienced previously, along with a number of neighbors, some of whom I hadn't met previously. But that really has been the daily experience here across the country, certainly in my neighborhood and in my block. including in the early hours of the night when some of these attacks have taken place. Basically, there's a very sophisticated early alert system that gives you a few minutes to organize yourself, and then when the sirens sound to tell you that the missiles are in course potentially to strike where you are, that gives you a few more seconds, a couple more minutes to find shelter in a bomb shelter. People aren't taking chances. They might have taken shelter at home previously. They're all going to these underground shelters provided by the municipality, by the country, because as we've seen, the destruction wrought by those missiles that have managed to penetrate Israel's air defenses has been substantial.
Dan, I'm wondering about, not just anecdotally, but what the numbers tell us about Israeli citizens who have been mobilized to serve in this specific conflict versus just the ongoing war in Gaza. Obviously, there's been a lot of disruption to the economy. As a result, we're Bloomberg, we focus on the numbers, we look at the economies a lot here and get an understanding of what the bigger impacts of these events can be. What can you tell us about just Israeli citizenry right now? Who has been called up to serve? What has been disrupted? Just give us an idea.
That's an excellent question. But it's worth remembering this Israeli-Iranian war is not just a war in its own right. It's actually the culmination, the cresting of a more than 2-month-old war that began with the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th, 2023. You'll recall that in the early days of that war, we're talking more than 20 months ago now, Israel enlisted some 300,000 reservists that were mobilized. That took a big chunk out of the economy. You literally saw shops shutting down, entire malls, not just as a precaution against rocket attacks, but simply because shops were short-staffed. Anyone between the age of 21, 35 had a very good chance of being in uniform at that point. Many people leaving their families behind, their careers, and that was very disruptive. As that war made progress, Gaza was largely overrun. Many of those soldiers were demobbed, allowed to return home. This war with Iran is mainly being fought by the Air Force, which you can assume is fully mobilized. We're talking 200 warplanes just in the first wave, dozens of warplanes every day in various places, and not just Iran. We've had airstrikes in Gaza today and in Lebanon, potentially patrols in Syria as well. I don't have the numbers for Air Force deployment, whether it's standing military or reservists. I know it's probably lower than the ground forces, which have been deployed in far smaller numbers. There are 4 divisions now active in Gaza. And of course, there's Home Front Command, which is basically a military version of a civil defense force. Its responsibility is to handle emergencies on the home front, dig people out of rubble, provide first aid and such.
Dan, U.S. President Donald Trump signaled he would give diplomacy a chance before deciding whether to intervene militarily in the war between Israel and Iran. How is that being received there?
Well, if you notice the mood music from Israeli statements since that announcement was made by the White House, there's a tendency among Israelis who've commented on this to perhaps try to persuade the president to decide in favor of military intervention, at least when it comes to bombing Fordow, the famous now deep underground uranium enrichment site the Iranians have. It's so deep underground in a mountain that Israeli firepower may not be enough to reach it. It may be a job that can be left only to the American Air Force with the famous mother of all bombs, 30,000 pounds that would be dropped from a B-2. And I think the Israelis openly want that to happen. Failing that, they say they can manage the job alone. It's a difficult job, but they say they can manage it alone. The question is how long the Iranians can keep up their retaliatory missile attacks. It would appear those are tapering off. Today we had something in the order, as I said, of 30 missiles, whereas in the opening weekend, 5 days ago, it was an average of about 100 missiles on every 24-hour cycle. So that seems to be dropping off, the Israelis say, as a result of their preemptive attacks against launchers. I think we will know more at the end of this weekend, especially as the Iranians are apparently holding stopgap talks with European powers now in Geneva, perhaps to find a way back to diplomacy, which would satisfy Trump, indirectly satisfy Israel, and perhaps bring this story to a close.
Dan, you mentioned that if the U.S. does not get involved with the massive 30,000-pound bunker buster bomb, Israel could handle this itself. How would they do that? What's the reporting telling you?
Obviously, there's strict military secrecy. I don't know. But the Israelis insist, including skeptical ex-generals who say they've been briefed on this, that it is possible. The 2 things that come to mind are, A, simply sustained bombing at one side. It's worth remembering back in September, Israel killed the chief of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah. He was in a bunker underneath a residential building, by then largely vacated, something like 20 meters underground, with a multi-story building above him. What the Israelis did was drop 54 bombs, bomb after bomb after bomb, basically deepening the crater until he was reached. In theory, the same thing could be done on a much larger scale, much more sustained. With Fordo, keep in mind the Israelis say they have complete dominance of the Iranian skies. So in theory, there'd be no problem with them going back and forth with their smaller airplanes, smaller delivery payloads, and simply do it for days and perhaps weeks until they crack that nut. The other possibility is a ground forces operation, commandos who would penetrate it and literally go floor to floor, destroying anything they come across, blowing up, engaging whatever personnel there are down there. There is a precedent also from last summer where Israel did this with an underground Hezbollah facility in Syria. That might serve as a tactful precedent.
All right, Dan, going to leave it there. We know it's late there in Jerusalem. Appreciate being able to touch base with you. Do stay safe, thinking about you, your family, and certainly your community. Bloomberg News reporter Dan Williams there in Jerusalem. We're going to stay with the war between Israel and Iran. Let's head to the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., our bureau there. And for more on what's going inside the Oval Office, specifically the White House, when it comes to potentially more U.S. involvement, and also what's going on in Geneva, because you got to keep in mind, talks aimed at de-escalating this war between Israel and Iran are being held with the Iranian foreign minister meeting counterparts from the UK, France, and Germany. For insight, we turn once again to Nick Wadhams. Nick, good to have you here. Feels like President Trump wants to give it a little bit more time when it comes to diplomacy. Is this all about the president really, when it comes to it, not wanting to lead the U.S. into war? He was very vocal about that, certainly on the campaign trail.
Right. I mean, if he does decide to get the U.S. involved in this war, it would essentially undercut what was a key identifier for his campaign and also for how he sees himself as a leader. I mean, I can't tell you the number of briefings and conversations I've been in and had with Trump-adjacent folks who tout him as the peace president. So if he is essentially attacking Iran with U.S. forces, that's going to fundamentally undercut that. I think what you're seeing now, what you can suspect is happening behind the scenes, is a very robust debate over what involvement from the U.S. might look like and what the potential political downsides are of that. If he launches a single strike on Fordo, as you were talking about there with Dan, does that essentially widen the terms or expose the U.S. to risk of attack from Iran? Iran has said if the U.S. attacks, it would go after U.S. bases. So I think their question is, would a U.S. attack, for one thing, be effective given that Fordo is so deep underground? What are the risks to U.S. troops, U.S. service members, the air crews flying those planes? And then what would the risk be of the U.S. getting ensnared in this thing? Could they just do a quick strike and then get out? Because there are obviously other voices appealing to the president, Lindsey Graham, folks in the Senate, Tom Cotton, some others who are saying, listen, a strike will take out the nuclear program and be effective and won't entangle the U.S. in that broader conflict.
There's also those out there, Nick, who say that a strike, while it may temporarily halt or stop progress when it comes to enrichment for a bomb in Iran, a nuclear warhead, it won't necessarily erase the knowledge that Iranians have been able to glean over the last few decades about how to do this work. So it would be perhaps a temporary stopgap. I'm curious, in your view, about a diplomatic solution. What would that look like? Because there are those out there who argue that could be something that's more sustained.
Right. I mean, well, so this is the great question, and what we're so eager for details out of those European discussions, and what the challenge is that the Trump administration simply has not been able to overcome in the months that it's been in office. He says that Iran should not have the right to enrich uranium on its own soil, and Iran insists on having the right to enrich uranium on its own soil. That is the fundamental disagreement. The question is, can you achieve diplomacy essentially at the point of a gun or under threat of bombardment? What Trump wants is total capitulation. He wants Iran to be able to say in one of these conversations, okay, we are not going to enrich. We are going to give up that right. And as you see early indications from these talks in Europe, Iran is not saying that yet. So that's the question then I have is, does that cause President Trump to double down? And then there's the second order question there, which is, does this then have an unintended effect, which would be for Iran simply to hide its designs and potentially pursue enrichment at sites that are even more hidden that we don't know about? I mean, you can perhaps cripple their ability to develop nuclear weapons now, but you can't take away the desire if they have it. Now, it's important to note that Iran says it's never wanted a nuclear weapon, and U.S. intelligence actually says that they believe Iran is still undecided about whether to pursue one. But you're right, you can't get rid of that knowledge, and you also can't get rid of the idea that they may come to believe that pursuing a nuclear weapon is in their interest.
Nick, is the United States directly involved in an Israeli-Iran war better or worse for U.S. national security, for global security?
I mean, that is a very big
I like
question.
to give you the easy ones, Nick.
You know, I mean, listen, there are a lot of conversations right now around that seem similar to the conversations that folks were having after September 11th in the run-up to the invasion of Afghanistan, and then again with the invasion of Iraq in 2003. The belief that there would be simple solutions to very difficult problems. You drop a bomb, you essentially force Iran to capitulate, maybe you even overthrow the regime in Tehran, and the question is always, well, what comes next? And we're sort of limited there by our own imagination and by the potential best case, but also the potential worst case scenarios. So the critics of the administration so far in this call to bomb have been saying, haven't you forgotten what happened in the last 25 years and how we came to rue those decisions to go into Afghanistan and Iraq? Others say no, it's completely different. You know, if what we have to do is just diminish their ability to have a nuclear weapon, eliminate it. We don't care about the regime. We're not going for regime change. We just can't have that threat. So that's where you're seeing really the fundamental tension point in the political conversation back here.
Nick, just quickly, just about 40 seconds. We know that the president, through Caroline Leavitt, the statement was within 2 weeks that there will be some kind of, I guess, decision or response or what have you. How do you read that? Because I think people are wondering about what's the timetable really on this.
Right. I mean, that's the thing we're all really chasing. As of the middle of last week, the belief, the conventional wisdom really was that the strike was going to happen this weekend, tonight or tomorrow night. And then you have Caroline Leavitt saying within 2 weeks, which still could mean tonight or tomorrow night. It just gives the president a little more leeway and room to maneuver and room to consider, so that if he doesn't do it this weekend, I think, you know, he won't be called weak by some of those critics who believe he should do it.
10 more seconds. If he stays at the White House, should we read anything into it? If he goes to Mar-a-Lago, should we read anything into it? Just quickly.
Bedminster?
Or Bedminster?
No, I don't think you should read anything into wherever the president is. I mean, those decisions really come and go very quickly. And I mean, he has the infrastructure to make these decisions wherever he is.
That is very, very true. All right, Nick Wadhams, stay safe. He's Bloomberg News National Security Team Leader. Nick Wadhams in our bureau in the nation's capital. Coming up next, what the U.S. does may, though, have significant implications for arms proliferation. This is something that's part of the conversation. That's ahead when Bloomberg Business Week Daily continues on this Friday.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg, looking at a rebound for the Dow Jones Industrial Average, up now by 49. Last update, we told you it was lower, but right now we got a gain of 0.1%. The S&P on this Friday does remain lower. It also remains below 6,000 at 59.75. The S&P down 5 points. Now little change, down by just about 0.1%. NASDAQ down 64, a decline there of 0.3%. The 10-year 4.36%, with the 2-year 3.90%. Gold down $4 the ounce, 33.66, a drop of 0.1%. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.2%, 75.01 a barrel on WTI. Bitcoin right now down 1%, 103,302 on Bitcoin. The American College of Cardiology is recommending that weight loss drugs be used earlier to prevent heart disease, particularly for obese patients, as exercise and diet may not be enough. The organization suggests considering Novo Nordisk's Wegovy and Eli Lilly's Zepbound as primary treatments to avert heart disease, which is the leading cause of death in the United States. Recapping, stocks lower, S&P down 6, a drop now of 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thanks so much. Hey, as the world awaits to see what happens in terms of the U.S. role in the war between Israel and Iran, whether or not there will be more of a role, the latest evidence from the ground does suggest that they would need to significantly escalate attacks if they want to eradicate the Islamic Republic's nuclear capabilities. Now, satellite images, there's this incredible story on the Bloomberg. Highly recommend that you check it out at on the Bloomberg terminal or at Bloomberg.com. But these satellite images essentially, Tim, show that atomic installations were only grazed after 4 days of bombardment.
The Israel-Iran conflict comes down largely to nuclear capabilities. Who has it, who wants it, and perhaps who needs it to keep world order without actually disrupting it. With us is John Erath, Senior Policy Director for the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation. It's a nonpartisan nonprofit that's dedicated to reducing and eventually eliminating the threats posed by nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons through congressional engagement and public education. John, good to have you with us this afternoon. Appreciate you joining us on the program. Your specialty is thinking about these weapons in the context of getting rid of them. And I'm wondering, over your career, where we are given a world, in a world right now, when it comes to non-proliferation of these weapons.
Well, it's a mixed story. Since the Cold War, about 80% of the nuclear weapons that ever existed have been eliminated. But right now we see the pendulum swinging a little bit in the other direction, where the nuclear weapons are given a little bit more currency, where you see proliferators such as North Korea and Iran putting more emphasis on possessing those weapons and giving a little more importance to them. So what is going to happen in the next few weeks and months, particularly with regard to Iran, is going to have a significant impact on how these weapons are viewed in the future and what the world is going to look like and how the world is going to think about them.
You know, my follow-up was going to be, but I feel like you've answered it. You know, are we indeed on the cusp of what could be a very, very serious turn for the worse when it comes to nuclear proliferation? It sounds like you are saying yes, depending on how this plays out.
Absolutely. If Iran is allowed to acquire nuclear weapons, if they're perceived coming out of this conflict as becoming significant in the currency of international politics, then there are going to be other governments that are going to want to follow suit. There's also the case of Russia and Ukraine. Russia has been using threats of nuclear weapons to advance its objectives regarding Ukraine, particularly with the nuclear blackmail that it has been conducting. It's been making threats with nuclear weapons pretty much every Tuesday since the war in Ukraine began in 2022 to keep Western nations from supplying arms and ammunition to Ukraine, to withhold, to limit what they supply to the Ukrainians. And it's been very effective. countries such as North Korea are paying attention to this, and they're looking for their own means of nuclear blackmail. If Russia comes out of this war perceived as having succeeded in attaining its objectives through nuclear blackmail, other countries, starting with Kim Jong-un, are going to take notice.
Okay, and forgive me if this sounds naive. The U.S. is the only nation, right, to have ever actually used nuclear warfare, weapons, I should say, in warfare. So having said that, why is it, again, forgive if this sounds naive, but why is the U.S. allowed to have nuclear weapons and other nations versus an Iran or North Korea? Is it just because we believe in the control and the safety and that they actually won't be used, considering the U.S. has been the only one who used it? Like, help me understand this.
I think if you ask that question of a number of different U.S. leaders, you would get a number of different answers. I used to work for the U.S. government, and my answer would be that having used nuclear weapons, I think that I would say that speaking for the U.S., I would say I would wish that we hadn't. And having nuclear weapons, I would say that I would hope that the U.S. would never be in a position to use them again. The official U.S. nuclear policy, as expressed in the Nuclear Posture Review that was done most recently by the Biden administration, but basically repeating language from the Trump administration and from every administration previous to that, was that the U.S. nuclear weapons are for defense and deterrence, not for offensive use, but basically to protect against somebody else using nuclear weapons against us. And that has been very much the policy of U.S. administration since the Cold War.
And we should remind everyone who's listening, we're talking about John Areth, Senior Policy Director for the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation. It's a nonpartisan nonprofit. John has worked with the government some 30 years in arms control and non-proliferation, and most recently a 2-year assignment with the U.S. National Security Council. So this guy understands it, certainly from the inside.
John, a lot of our conversation is focused on Iran. We mentioned North Korea there, but I want to hit on Russia a little bit, because there seems to be, at least within the international community, a tolerance for Russia having nuclear weapons that does not extend to other countries that are not necessarily allies currently of the United States. I know there's a lot of history here with the Cold War, but and also the agreements post-Cold War that the U.S. and Russia have with one another to prevent the proliferation of nuclear weapons. But why do you think the international community tolerates Russia having nuclear weapons?
I think it's a case of familiarity. Russia inherited the nuclear weapons from the Soviet Union. 3 other countries did as well, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Belarus. And there was a concerted effort made, led by the United States in the early days following the Cold War, to return all of those weapons to Russian control. This was one of the highest priorities of the Clinton administration back in the early 90s. And it was a case where it was seen as Russia being the responsible steward for these weapons, and it was seen as being a more desirable outcome than proliferating nuclear technology to 3 more countries. That was seen as putting a chink in the wall and allowing more countries to have nuclear weapons and possibly leading to greater proliferation in other places. Nowadays, we look back at that and say, maybe that wasn't such a good idea, but that was very much the spirit of the time.
We mentioned in our lead up to you a great read on this on the Bloomberg about the satellite images that reveal that President Trump's dilemma over the Iran nuclear complex. You know, there's a lot more that needs to be done. What do we know about the damage that really has been done so far to the nuclear capabilities by Iran? And especially when it comes to non-civilian uses, what do we know about that in particular?
What we know is that Iran has been enriching uranium to levels that are not necessary for anything but weapons. That is to say, there is no benign reason to enrich uranium to the levels that Iran has been. This is what has got Israel upset. Israel, however, has chosen to use military means to address this issue. It is possible that Israel may be able to significantly degrade, destroy, disable Iran's enrichment facilities. It may be possible that should the U.S. become involved, the U.S. may be able to do more than Israel to destroy or degrade these enrichment facilities. But that is actually beside the point, because Iran can simply rebuild.
Mm-hmm.
It may be with considerable expense and considerable effort, but they can rebuild. They built them once, they can do it again. Maybe it will be better and more difficult to destroy the next time, but it can be rebuilt. So the military effort is all more or less a waste. It's only through diplomacy and diplomatic effort that we can get to a permanent solution in this case. Now, you'd expect that from me. I'm a career diplomat. When you interview somebody who has worn a uniform for 30 years, he's going to talk about the military means as being the only way forward, the only solution. But you're talking to a diplomat, so I'm going to feature the diplomatic means.
What is the diplomatic solution then? What, in your view, would actually stop Iran from wanting and being able to achieve a nuclear weapon?
And did we have it? The deal that President Trump pulled out of in 2018?
The deal that was done in 2015 basically blocked the pathway to nuclear weapons for Iran. And it had a robust verification mechanism so that we would know if Iran was cheating, we would know if Iran was doing something that they weren't supposed to. The problem with it was that it had a 10-year sunset provision. So under certain circumstances, after 10 years, which is, say now, 2025, Iran could resume enrichment activity. And the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, didn't like that and tried to renegotiate, got a cold shoulder from Iran and from the Europeans, and decided at that point, rather than to try to fix that problem or do anything else, make another effort, to pull out. So I think you would start with something along those lines, but without that sunset provision. Certainly you could bring back most of the elements of the verification provisions in the IAEA supervision, and the confidence that gave that Iran was not conducting these activities.
Not easy, not easy at all. Thank you so much. Really appreciate getting some time with you on this Friday. John Areth, he is Senior Policy Director for the Nonpartisan Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation, joining us there in New Jersey. Hey, though, we think about this situation, spending on military, nuclear for any nation often comes at a cost to its citizens. So when we come back here on Bloomberg Business Week Daily, how that may have impacted Iran's citizens. Kind of a slice of a life in Iran. That's what we're tackling next. This is Bloomberg.
It's 2:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the S&P 500 index trading a little change, down 9, drop there of just about 0.1%. The Dow higher up 23 now, up 0.1%, while NASDAQ is down 75, a decline of 0.4%. A fresh bout of volatility has gripped stocks amid talks aimed at de-escalating the conflict in the Middle East. Also, a $6.5 trillion expiration of options threatens to trigger sudden price swings. Again, the S&P 500 index lower, down 0.2%, giving up earlier gains. The 10-year 4.37% with a 2-year 3.90%. Gold down 0.2%, 33.65 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.3%, 74.93 a barrel. Bitcoin now down by 1.1% at 103,201 on Bitcoin. Circle Internet Group shares are rallying 20% after Seaport Global gave the stablecoin issuer its first buy rating in the wake of the Senate's move this week to pass legislation setting up regulatory rules for cryptocurrencies pegged to the dollar. Again, Circle up now by 21%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Charlie Pellet there with an update on the trade. Carol Massar, Tim Stanovic live here on Bloomberg Business Week Daily. And folks, it is an economy battered by years of trade embargoes, sanctions, and an endemic mismanagement. We're talking about Iran. And that Israeli and Western intelligence assessment seen by Bloomberg suggested that the war could lead to an economic collapse in Iran and inflation of 80%. If not higher. Now, according to this report, it would likely result in social discontent and challenging of the stability of the ruling regime, Tim.
Yeah, we wanted to talk really about the daily existence of Iranians right now and how it shifted really over the last 50 or so years, specifically the last 15 years. The challenges about life in Iran for its citizens who are currently under attack, their challenges and what they're experiencing. To help us understand that, Alex Vatanka is back with us, senior fellow at Middle East Institute. It's an organization with the mission to, quote, increase knowledge of the Middle East among citizens of the U.S. and to promote a better understanding between the people of these two areas. The organization has received funding from various sources, including corporations, foundations, and various Middle Eastern governments, such as the UAE and Qatar, as well as the U.S. government. Alex joins us once again from Washington, D.C. Alex, we've spoken to our reporters on the ground in Israel. We haven't been able to do the same for people on the ground in Tehran and other parts of Iran. We wanted to speak with you. You were born there. You're still in touch with people throughout the country. Can you give us an understanding of what life is like day to day right now?
Tim and Carol, great to be back with you. Look, you're right. I mean, obviously that's my day job, trying to track what's going on in the country of Iran. But the last few days actually been very hard. With some exceptions, internet is essentially no longer accessible. The authorities believe the Israelis are using access to the internet for their operations against the Iranian regime. The other way of looking at it is maybe the Iranian authorities are concerned about public mobilization. There is for sure a lot of messaging going into Iran from the large Iranian diaspora, which is vastly anti-regime. So there's a very lively debate outside of Iran among Iranians across the world that what would be best for the country. There are those who are saying regime change is the opportunity right now, but there are also many who are skeptical and saying, actually, we don't know if regime change is the outcome. It could be civil war. It could be something worse. So let's take it easy here.
Well, Alex, what I want to also do is take a step back. And what has life been like under the Ayatollah, who has been reigning for, some 36 years? What has life been like for Iranians before this attack?
So, Carol, I mean, let me just remind everybody that Iran had a revolution in 1979, and Ayatollah Khomeini and his people, including the one who's the supreme leader today, Khamenei, took over. And if you ask the 75% of Iranians who were born after that revolution, they will tell you life has not been pretty because it's been a very repressive regime across the board. It's been domestically repressive and it's been very adventurous, ideological, stubborn in terms of its foreign policy. I mean, the reason why we're seeing this war happen, and again, let's put aside if Israel was justified to attack Iran or not last week, that's a separate issue. But the fact is, this Islamic Republic for so long has been sort of taunting the Israelis, saying you don't have a right to exist and so on. So a lot of Iranians are asking, you know, we don't like what Israel's doing to Iran right now, but at the same time, you're not exactly innocent. You asked for this. You taunted them. So life.
Well, I guess but what is life like? What does the average Iranian make? What is their existence like in terms of a home, food on the table? What is that like?
So it's a medium-sized economy. I mean, it should have been a top 20 economy if they weren't under sanctions. They should be the size of Turkey, if not bigger, because Iran, unlike Turkey, is a lot of oil and gas. So very educated population of 90 million, pretty significant industrial base, agricultural base. Again, a lot of, parts of the economy. I mean, the idea that it's oil is not true. It's much more multifaceted than that. But sanctions have really had a great impact on life. So, one of the headlines for your average Iranian in terms of life is there are no jobs. Inflation is rampant. There's repression. There is isolation. So what do a lot of Iranians do? They look for a way out. Immigration has become basically the way out. That's why you have this large diaspora around the world. Not because people want to leave their homes, but because the opportunities just don't exist in Iran.
What has been the resistance to the government, and how has that proliferated or not since 2009?
There's always been resistance going back to 1979. Has it been always an effective resistance? That's the big question mark. To this day, we have a large Iranian political opposition, but it's not united. There's a lot of energy there, but they haven't agreed on an agenda in terms of the day after. So you have the Shah's son, who is obviously very well known here in the United States. He's on TV quite a bit. He is the most prominent figure. He has an agenda. He wants to sort of transition Iran out of the Islamic Republic into something else. I have heard him personally many times. I think he has got some great ideas. I do have question marks whether he can unify the diaspora in terms of the day after in Iran. I have also the question in terms of whether he can unify the folks in Iran. I mean, that's where the battle is going to be. It's not the diaspora. It's those 90 million Iranians. Where are they going to go? Who will lead them? That's the big question mark, ahead for the opposition.
The reason I asked specifically about 2009 is because of the protests following the election in Iran, the presidential election. And my understanding has been that there has not really been there was a sense of unification there, but that was pretty quickly quashed, and since then nothing really has emerged.
So 2009 is not the only time, Tim, that people came to the streets. You have many other examples going back to 99 and even before. 2009 was significant for a couple of reasons. One, it happened 2 years before the Arab Spring. So the Iranians were ahead of the Arabs in terms of coming out in the streets. But the other part of the 2009 uprising in Iran was because part of the regime came to the street. So it wasn't just people from the street, ordinary Iranians. It was part of the regime that came out against, back then in that election, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, if you remember that fella. But in 2009, you've had plenty of protests. I mean, the largest ones just happened a few years ago in 2022 with the Mahsa Amini, the young Iranian woman who was killed just because she wasn't wearing her headscarf, which is by law mandatory in Iran. She was killed for that, which, by the way, just raises another issue. Imagine living in a society where you can't decide what your dress code will be. So this is a regime that's lost its people a long time ago. The question is, do they have time to catch up? They're desperately trying to play the nationalist card. I wonder if it's too late, if they can stay in power.
What do the people want? And what does the region want? And forgive me, but just got about 40 seconds here. What kind of an Iran do they want going forward?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a no-brainer. People want the end of the Islamic Republic. That's a no-brainer. And I think that's true for the rest of the region. Nobody wants the Islamic Republic. The big question mark is at what cost? And can it be done in a different way other than bombs dropping on their heads? Because people remember Iraq, they remember other cases of civil wars in the region. So that's the big challenge for American policymakers, Europeans, and others who are trying to steer this situation forward.
If the U.S. doesn't get more involved, can better change come to Iran? Again, just got about 20 seconds.
big question mark. But look, my bottom line is this. It's for the people of Iran to decide their destiny. U.S. can help them, but U.S. right now, I don't see the appetite getting involved in a big way.
All right, going to leave it there. Alex, thanks so much. Have a good weekend. Safe one. Alex Vadanka, he's Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute. When we come back, a check on trading and update for you, as well as some stocks on the move on this Friday. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week Daily with Carol Masser and Tim Stenbeck on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
All right, folks, just coming up on an hour to go left in the trading session as we get ready to wrap up the Friday session. Really the week overall, a funny week. Of course, we were closed, markets closed yesterday for the Juneteenth holiday. We are definitely down across the board. Just down, though, about 0.25% on the S&P 500. Just up about a point, 2 points maybe, on the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Call that flat as well. And the NASDAQ 100 down about 0.4%, Tim. A decline of about 82, 83 points.
I'm Tim Stenbeck along with Carol Masser. Let's take a look at some stocks on the move today. With us is a Bloomberg News reporter, Denitsa Sakova. Denitsa, what is on your radar?
Let's look at KBR. That's one of the biggest decliners today. It dropped as much as 8.6%. So this is an engineering company that has a lot of Department of Defense, we're talking NASA, we're talking a lot of those big names. And today there was an announcement that one of the contracts was terminated by the U.S. Transportation Command. It's interesting because the company says that this development is not expected to have a material impact. They had a really strong earnings report, but clearly, obviously, on a very low volume day, markets are reacting quite negatively.
Investors think differently, maybe about that material impact.
Indeed. BI says that the termination of the contract may reflect risks to government service providers, and obviously that company has a lot of exposures to government contract. BI was actually very bullish after the earnings report, just because the company has stayed away from risky infrastructure contract and relied on government contracts, but clearly that's a problem now. The stock is down more than 15% year to date, and I think it's a good proxy to see with all those companies who are relying heavily on government contracts. So it's an interesting name.
Agreed. And right, it looks like there are some that will maybe do well going forward and some that might not, and this one certainly seems under pressure again. KBR is the ticker, and it's down 7%. Let's go to one that has been on fire this month.
Yes, I keep checking the price. Now it's nearly 700%. It's about 670. It just never stops.
Does the stock go down?
No.
Okay.
It actually went down 2 days, but it's so small that you cannot see it on the chart.
Ticker, please.
CRCL. Today rose as much as 25%, and it's actually because they initiated a buy rating at Seaport. But the buy rating was 235% price tag, which was already reached today. We're a little bit lower now, but it just tells you how rapid this rally is. Obviously, that's a name that just IPO'd. There has been big legislation in the Senate that is moving, setting up regulatory rules.
What does Circle Internet do?
Sorry?
Stable coins.
Yes, stable coins.
Stable coins.
Thank you, crypto dude.
And not
crypto
only.
dude. I'm not crypto man.
You've
not
graduated.
crypto boy.
Yeah.
Crypto
You were
dude.
upgraded to crypto.
I was
I know.
upgraded to crypto dude.
Congrats.
Okay, thank
He's
you.
been upgraded. He's been
Appreciate
upgraded. Okay, so
they're going beyond stable coins. They have a payments network to help financial institutions. So that's why we saw MasterCard and Visa falling the other day. So it's a little bit more than just stable coin. But anyway, a lot of optimism there.
unbelievable.
I finally convieved Carol to do one of these as her gainer.
I know, you're like, you have to do this. You have to do this. And you know what? Once again, he was right. Kroger.
Yeah, that's a very different company. Rose as much as 10% on a good earnings report.
There could be a Kroger stable coin in our future to buy groceries.
Everything is possible.
Anything's possible.
We need that.
They're not doing it. We're just speculating.
We're just speculating. So yeah, good earnings reports sign that consumers, we're so worried about consumers, but they're still spending on those essentials. Obviously, Kroger has a lot of groceries. And one thing we're seeing when consumers are pulling out, they're eating more at home. So that's one reason perhaps a brand like Kroger is not necessarily seeing so much pressure. The report was really good. Comparable sales rose 3.2%. The company raised its full year sales guidance. The CEO said that the company has seen an improvement in grocery volumes. So overall, pretty bullish about the consumers. Of course, this is just kind of an essential chain, so we cannot say that necessarily it means that the consumer is doing so much better, but one good sign that consumers continue to spend on necessities and groceries.
Gotta eat. Gotta eat. I think I heard Paul Sweeney say this morning.
You can't eat stable coins.
That's true.
That's right.
I'm told.
You can eat those chocolate coins. Remember those little chocolate coins we used to get?
Yeah.
Oh, I love those.
I know. Who doesn't? Who doesn't? All right, Bloomberg News cross-asset reporter Denitsa Sikova joining us here in studio. For more conversations, check out our Stock Movers podcast, 5-minute episodes of the biggest winners and losers in the stock market at any given time. Listen to Stock Movers. You can find it on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere you get your podcasts. All right, we're getting ready to wrap up our first hour of Bloomberg Business Week Daily. Again, we've got a market well off its best levels of the day, hovering near its lows. Little changes overall, triple witching though, so we'll see what kind of movement we get in the last hour of trading. So we'll see how things settle in.
If you're going to stick with us on Bloomberg Business Week Daily on YouTube, Bloomberg Originals, or on Bloomberg Radio, we got a great program coming up. We're kicking it off with Peter Atwater of William & Mary. He's also the author of The Confidence Map. He's got a new note out, Push Me, Pull You Economics. He's going to explain what that is all about. Also, between the U.S. and China, we've got conflict over rare earths, or I guess you could call it a bargaining chip. Then there's also semiconductors, another kind of chip. Mike Shepard's going to join us to break down the latest there.
It's a reminder, right? There's the war in the Middle East that we are watching between Iran and Israel, but there's the tariff and trade war that continues. And so stuff continues to percolate in the background, and it definitely is impacting different sectors. And folks, it's June. We're going to talk about what's going on with Pride specifically as we think about the diversity of the United States and what it all means. That's all coming ahead in the next hour.
CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by O'Reilly Auto Parts.
I'm Peter King. A judge has ordered ICE to release a college student detained for taking part in pro-Palestinian demonstrations. Here's CBS News Justice reporter Jake Rosen.
A federal judge in New Jersey ordered that Columbia University student activist Mahmoud Khalil must be released from detention by Immigration and Customs Enforcement as his immigration proceedings play out. During a hearing before U.S. District Judge Michael Farbars, Khalil's attorneys asked for him to free Khalil from detention or transfer him to New Jersey. Farbars agreed, determining that Khalil is not a threat to the community, not a flight risk, and that his detention has been, quote, highly unusual.
A Supreme Court win for the Trump administration on tariffs, and here's legal analyst Lori Levinson.
The Supreme Court issued an order today that says that they are track any challenges to President Trump's use of tariffs. Trump has used these tariffs as what he calls an emergency measure under an act. But the challenge to this is that it should be Congress deciding on tariffs.
New Yorkers have a couple of days to get ready for extreme heat on this first weekend of summer, but Governor Kathy Hochul says starting Sunday,
it feels like temperatures will approach 100 degrees. This is so unusual for all of us.
Much of the East could see the century mark. Columbia, South Carolina Dr. Amanda Stratton says, watch out for this.
Signs and symptoms of heat stroke are confusion or altered mental status. Sometimes people can be unconscious. A lot of times they stop sweating. Heat stroke is an emergency, so it's important if you notice somebody with these symptoms to call 911.
There have been no more words on Iran from President Trump since his press secretary said he'd give it up to 2 weeks before deciding whether the U.S. should join Israel in attacking Iran's nuclear sites. CBS's Vicki Barker on talks that are just starting in Geneva.
These are the first face-to-face talks between Western and Iranian officials since the outbreak of the war. Britain's Foreign Minister David Lammy, flying into Geneva straight from meetings in Washington, says there's now a 2-week window to find a diplomatic solution.
The Trump administration says California educators can no longer teach anything having to do with gender identity. CBS's Alexander Tin.
California has 60 days to comply with an order issued by the Federal Department of Health and Human Services, telling the state to change its sex ed curriculum, stripping out all mentions of what the Trump administration is calling, quote, radical gender ideology in the federally funded personal responsibility education program. The Trump administration says that federal laws governing the program does not allow teaching students that, quote, boys can identify as girls or vice versa.
On Wall Street, the Dow has lost 20 points and the NASDAQ is down 120. This is CBS News. Normally, we're told to be wary of hitchhikers, but this is a most unusual case.
Hugh Jackman was mobbed by fans in Midtown Manhattan as he exited a rehearsal for his one-man show at Radio City Music Hall. The actor kept it friendly, signing autographs and posing for selfies, but when the crowds kept coming, the Marvel star jumped into a random car passing by.
Hey there, brother. Where are you going?
He made his getaway, stunning the driver and other occupants inside. Deborah Rodriguez, CBS News, New York.
Another guy was unable to get away after getting into an altercation with Pittsburgh Pirates pitcher Dennis Santana during yesterday's doubleheader in Detroit, but we don't know exactly what it was all about. Police escorted the fan from the stadium. Pirates teammates pulled Santana away. Peter King, CBS News.
This is Bloomberg Business Week Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week Daily with Carol Masser and Tim Stenovec, live on Bloomberg Radio, television, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals.
And a very good afternoon, everyone. We are just about 55 minutes away from the closing bell on this Friday, getting ready to wrap up, the holiday shortened trading week. Of course, we were closed yesterday for the Juneteenth holiday. Today, bit of a mellow trade, but definitely off our best levels of the session, lower across the board when you look at the S&P Dow and the NASDAQ 100. We're going to talk about the market trade and, of course, the factors behind it. Having said that, we've got a great friend of the show coming up in just a moment.
Yeah, Peter Atwater of William & Mary is standing by. He's talking to us about what he calls push me, pull you economics. Going to explain what that's all about.
Yep, we're also going to get into the U.S. and China. The battle continues when it comes to the tech war, the trade war, the tariff war, chips and rare earths. So we're going to dig into the latest on that, some reporting out there today.
Also, what's going on with Pride? There's a lot of research out that shows that investments in Pride have been pulled back at workplaces around the country. Certainly the Pride Parade, some headlines around the Pride Parade.
Yeah.
At last month here in New York, there was a budget shortfall. We got an expert on this coming up in the 4 o'clock hour.
All right. That's all ahead in the next 2 hours. Hey, folks, let's get a check on the trading day for you. Let's toss things over to Charlie Pellet. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there indeed. 54 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell. We are on track for another losing week. It'll be 2 in a row with the S&P right now down 19. That is a drop of 0.3%. The S&P at 59.61. The Dow now down 19 points on the Dow, a drop of just under 0.1%, while NASDAQ is down 119, a decline there of 0.6%. The 10-year at 4.37%, with the 2-year 3.90%. Gold down 0.1%, 33.68 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.3, 74.93 for a barrel of WTI. Bitcoin just above $103,100, down now by 1.1%. Dana Dioria is co-chief investment officer at Envestnet, and on surveillance this morning, she said there are lots of reasons to not try to time the market.
If there's anything we're telling clients, it's this period of time validates the theory that you should sit still and stay with it and, not try to sell in and out of it. I mean, I think a lot of people coming off the Trump trade really sort of were empowered maybe to try to move money in markets, do timing. We know that the empirical evidence says that's not a very easy thing to do. It's not easy to make money that way. Boy, if you tried to time what was going on this year, you got yourself in a lot of trouble.
Dana Dioria, co-chief investment officer at Envestnet, interviewed on surveillance. American and European airlines have begun pausing flights to destinations in the Persian Gulf as Israel's conflict with Iran enters its second week and the U.S. mulls joining the attacks on Iranian nuclear sites. Shares of American Airlines down 0.3%. American has suspended daily flights to Qatar's capital, Doha, and shares of United UAL down now by 0.4%. Recapping, stocks lower, S&P down 20, down 0.4%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Hey, thanks for the Business Flash, Charlie. Do appreciate it. Speaking of the markets, Federal Reserve Governor Christopher Waller said the Fed can lower interest rates as soon as next month, reiterating his view that the inflation hit from tariffs is likely to be short-lived. Here's Governor Waller earlier today on CNBC.
Right now, the data the last few months has been showing that trend inflation is looking pretty good, even on a 12-month basis. So I've labeled these good news rate cuts when if inflation comes down to target, we can actually bring rates down. I've been saying this since about November of 23. So I think we're in that position that we could do this and as early as July.
That's Chris Waller earlier on CNBC. I said short-lived. That was my homage to Jay Powell.
Okay.
He says short-lived.
Hey, if Jay does it, I'm good with it.
That's what I'm throwing out there.
I'm totally good with it. Hey, Peter Atwater is back with us. He's president of Financial Insights, adjunct lecturer of economics at the college William and Mary, also author of the book, The Confidence Map, Charting a Path from Chaos to Clarity. He joins us from just outside Philadelphia. It feels like right now is a perfect time to talk about what feels like, again, from chaos or a moment of chaos, Peter. It's good to have you back with us. I am curious about, as we try to game out the stuff that happens around us, geopolitically, tariff wars, and so on, is all of this kind of a fool's errand in terms of trying to figure out what really is the impact ultimately on markets and how to price it in?
Well, Carol, thanks for having me today. And social media would certainly lead you to believe that. There's a whole new meme out there called "Nothing Ever Happens." And it seems to be the belief that whether it's tariffs, COVID, geopolitical events, none of it matters. And the fact that it's arising now strikes me as a really interesting moment. It sadly reminds me of what the turkey might say around the beginning of November. Nothing ever happens. and I think that's the risk that not only are investors complacent, but I sense that they're acting with impunity. And I see this in several dimensions where investors don't believe that there will ever be punishment, that there is now no downside to trading.
What do you mean by that, though? Is it because the Fed steps in? Is it because the U.S. government steps in? What's the put?
So it's a combination of puts. One is you've had repeated success where the markets have only gone up in their minds for the last 10, 15 years. You have policymaker puts on both the fiscal and monetary policy side. You also have this belief that the regime politically is not particularly willing to go against the market. In fact, just the opposite. So you had the taco trade, and you have a sense that while we may skirt the rules, there will never be any punishment for doing so.
You know, it's interesting, Peter, I keep thinking about this too. And I have to say, we know tariffs are going to be higher, right? On some level. We know supply chains are continuing to be rebuilt and brought back here. If immigration and the clampdown on immigration continues, less workers, that's going to have a cost. It does sound like there are a lot of factors that go into the U.S. economic equation that there's a good chance they're going to be different going forward.
They will be, but one of the things we know is that when we look at risks, if they are abstract to us, we will find ways to avoid them. And so what I sense is that tariffs, just like COVID, still remain abstract. People haven't experienced the consequences. And so until we get that, we can find all of these reasons to ignore it. But having said that, what is so interesting about this moment is that people are looking at these risks in the eye and laughing at them. There's almost there's a belligerent response to them that they're not going to matter. Move on.
Peter, you joined us in March, and one answer that you gave to a question that we had for you really ricocheted around. A lot of people ended up watching the clip on YouTube. You said there was a clear possibility that the U.S. becomes uninvestable under President Trump. Is it more likely now or less likely now than it was to you back in March?
It's less likely now, but I know that from a particularly foreign investor perspective, there is still apprehension about how welcome they and their money are here. And if I look at what happens in immigration and trade, we have started to see clear controls. And so we know that our policies related to labor, goods, and services and capital all move as one. And so I think that there is still concern, and I think appropriately so, around what happens to capital flows in all of this.
So let's just bring it back to one of the big events of the week, and that is Fed policy. And we did play some sound from Governor Waller, Fed Governor Waller, who was on CNBC earlier today, and then talking about maybe there could be some moves in July. Do you think that, I don't know, how are you thinking about monetary policy, Fed monetary policy, and how they are kind of trying to figure out what is the right policy here and kind of factoring in all of these things that you're talking about?
Yeah, so the Fed, in their desire to be data dependent, feels compelled to wait until things are real. And so there is reluctance on the part of many participants at the Fed to act until they see the results. Having said that, I would keep an eye on the 10-year. The 10-year ultimately is going to be what leads policymakers to move up or down. And right now, you've got, they would appear to have the ability to lower rates. Some, what that really means, we'll wait and see. But they're trend following at the end of the day. The markets will always move faster than a bureaucratic committee in Washington, always.
Peter, before we let you go, on the on what is investable right now, listener Ryan Horan getting in touch, asking about your alternatives away from U.S. markets when Europe can't grow, in his view. His view is also that Asia is likely in a recession. He wants to know, where do you invest for capital appreciation?
So I think you have to look at commodities in this environment. One of the things we know is that when you start to encumber trade, you run the risk of goods in the wrong places and commodity prices responding to that on a local basis. And when I look particularly around food inputs, you'd look at rice prices, for example. We can look at current oil prices. I think that the risk is in real asset prices.
All right. Really appreciate it. Peter, thank you so much, as always. Peter Atwater, President of Financial Insights, Adjunct Lecturer of Economics at William & Mary, joining us from outside Philadelphia. And of course, we've also talked about his book, which we have talked about here on air. It is The Confidence Map, Charting a Path from Chaos to Clarity. Appreciate his input on, so much, again, coming at us. He mentioned the 10-year note, folks. We're looking at a yield of 4.37. We've seen it spike up a little bit earlier in today's session, but we're definitely off some of the earlier higher levels. 2-year note with a yield of 3.9.
On the equity front, the S&P down 0.4%, the NASDAQ down 0.6%, the Dow pretty much flat right now. Coming up next, what's going on with rare earths and chip companies in the context of U.S. relations with China? We dig in after this.
It's 3:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Wall Street wrapping up a jittery week with losses in stocks as traders weigh the latest geopolitical and trade developments. We've got the S&P now down 21 at 59.59, a drop of 0.4%. The Dow is down 18, down less than 0.1%, while NASDAQ is down 125, a decline of 0.6%. Our Mag 7 index now down 1.1%, the 10-year at 4.37%, the 2-year 3.90% on the 2-year. Spot gold now down $1.33 the ounce to 33.69, down less than 0.1%. And crude West Texas Intermediate down 0.3%, 74.93 for a barrel of WTI. Again, that 2-year 3.90%. The American College of Cardiology is recommending that weight loss drugs be used earlier to prevent heart disease, particularly for obese patients, as exercise and diet may not be enough. And briefly, New York City has announced new minimum pay rules for rideshare drivers, settling on a smaller than proposed 5% increase following pushback from Uber and Lyft. Recapping stocks lower, S&P down 21, down 0.4%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much, Charlie Pellet. All right, you are listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week Daily. Carol Massar along with Tim Stenovic live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. Time for Bloomberg Tech Today, a conversation brought to you by Cisco. AI moves fast and the path forward isn't always clear. Cisco gives you the infrastructure, security, and observability to stay on course. Cisco, making AI work for you. Visit cisco.com/AI.
I'm watching shares of chip companies after the Wall Street Journal reported a U.S. Commerce Department official has told top semiconductor companies that he wants to revoke waivers they've used to access American tech in China. The stock's down about 0.8% as we speak. Speaking of China, it's been close to 10 days since the president declared a done trade deal with Beijing. U.S. companies, though, remain largely in the dark on when they'll receive crucial magnets from China and whether Washington, in turn, will allow a host of other exports to resume. Watching it all is Michael Shepard, Bloomberg News senior editor for tech and strategic industries. He joins us from our Washington, D.C. bureau. Michael, I want to start with the rare earths because I thought this was going to be a pretty big reprieve for the U.S. companies that are seeking access to these rare earths. When does that happen?
Well, many in Washington are asking that question right now, too, Tim, and you're asking the right thing. President Donald Trump on June 11th announced that there would be an upfront resumption in sales of critical minerals from China to American companies that have been clamoring for a restoration of flows of components that they need in so many products. We're talking about consumer electronics. The auto sector relies on these heavily, and even the defense sector, too, uses these rare earths in a lot of products across the economy, and the inability to access them from China is a problem. And that is because the world's second largest economy also happens to be the world's biggest source of these so-called rare earths. And lacking access to them, not seeing the permits approved with the speed that President Donald Trump had said would be coming from Beijing, has a lot in the industry quite concerned, because the longer this goes, the longer they are without these materials, the further the impact could show up on the production lines, Tim.
Hey, so Mike, is it a new trade escalation? Give me some context in terms of how we're supposed to read this. Is this just kind of ongoing, new, significant?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, Carol, because it really does fit into the larger trade conversation around China. It's never really just been about the tariffs that President Donald Trump threatened to and then eventually imposed on China. It really is about this escalating series of export controls in a tit-for-tat fashion between Washington and Beijing. The U.S. has been restricting China's access to sophisticated chip-making equipment and advanced semiconductors that are needed for AI, and China very much would like much more ability to access that technology so that it can power its own artificial intelligence ambitions. In retaliation, Beijing has cracked down on sales of those so-called rare earths to American companies in kind of gradual fashion, but it really intensified earlier this year with the imposition of those tariffs on Liberation Day back in April. And that really set in motion the two meetings that we saw between U.S. officials and Chinese officials. First in Geneva, where they achieved their first détente, but then again in London just less than 2 weeks ago when officials tried to get things back on track. And Carol, what had gotten them off track really was a failure of China to follow through on delivery of its promise to resume flows of critical minerals to the U.S., and B, what Beijing saw as efforts to impose controls on technology, including chip design software, that officials in Beijing interpreted as violating the spirit of those Geneva Accords. London was supposed to fix that, but maybe it hasn't yet.
All right, going to leave it there. Great setup for our next guest. Mike, thank you so much. Michael Shepard, Bloomberg News Senior Editor for Technology and Strategic Industries, joining us there from our Washington, D.C. bureau.
Okay, so that's the uncertainty around chips and rare earths. What about the uncertainty, Carol, when it comes to the corporate spending environment, especially when it comes to how companies are spending their money?
Yes, indeed. Well, Accenture shares fell after the IT services company reported its third quarter results. The company's CEO saying the company continues to see a significantly elevated level of uncertainty in the global economic and geopolitical environment as compared to calendar year 2024. There's a lot coming at folks and heads of companies and thinking about their IT spend. So we are curious what Joyce Mullen has to think of today's environment, where we are at this moment in time. She is president and CEO of Insight Enterprises. It's a $4.2 billion market cap company, consults with small and large businesses alike. Specialty is IT, and she joins us from Chandler, Arizona. Great to have you back with us. You've got tons of clients, thousands of clients, Joyce, including Boeing Resorts, AccuWeather, and more. What are they all saying about today's environment?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity, Carol and Tim. You know, as a leading solutions integrator who put hardware, software, and services together to deliver technology-driven outcomes, we are hearing an awful lot about two topics. The first one is something you've just been talking about, which is all around the trade policy, the reglobalization, or the changes in the global network around tariffs and trade, and that is driving some uncertainty. And then on the flip side, there is so much enthusiasm about these technologies surrounding Gen AI that I think every single CIO across the world is trying to figure out just how to put these technologies to work for them, and that's where we try to come in and help.
So are they shifting spending from other parts of their IT budgets to focus on AI? Are they pulling back spending from tech in general because there's an uncertain environment? Like, how would you characterize the allocation of funds right now?
Yeah, you know, I think what's happening is they're mostly delaying big projects in favor of smaller ones, in favor of projects that deliver really tangible outcomes in the short term. And they also are shifting spending to make sure they're getting ready for the AI applications, workflows, agentic changes that they're going to make in their environment. All of that's happening. So there is some shift, but there's also just the uncertainty is driving, I would also say, a delay in spending.
Interesting. So do you feel like once we know kind of the tariff landscape, Joyce, and some assumption that things at least settle down a little bit, although as we know with this White House, things can change, even if we think things have settled down. But having said that, so is this a second half story where companies can feel more confident in their spend?
We definitely believe we will see improvement in the second half. You know, I think the market is definitely shifting. So there's a lot of opportunity to think about how do I put my technology dollars to work more effectively. And in the meantime, you got to stay agile. You could just got to, we do a lot of work with our clients to make sure that no matter what the tariff policies, we can make sure they get the biggest bang for their buck.
What does agility mean in this? What does that mean? Does it mean don't hire? What does it mean? Do capital raises just in case? What does agility mean in this environment?
I think agility means being open to new ideas about how you might deliver the technology outcomes that you're looking for. So that might have historically meant I look at these devices, I might have to look at different devices because they might have to come from a different location because of tariffs. It might mean instead of on-prem, I'm looking at cloud, or instead of cloud, I'm looking at on-prem. It's figuring out how to look at the work, understand the opportunities to deliver the outcomes, and then getting the right counsel and advice so that you can actually execute and implement the solutions you need most. I think there's so many new options. There's so much complexity in the environment that figuring out how to keep projects bite-sized, deliver the results fast, earn the right to do more is the new order of the day. Very few clients that I talk to are interested in big, complicated, long-term agreements. They want short-term sprints that deliver those outcomes they're looking for, and then they'll use those outcomes to fund the next one and the next one and the next one, and that's exactly how we approach the market.
Hey, Joyce, as Carol mentioned, Accenture shares fell earlier in the session as much as 11%. The most going back intraday to March of 2020. The company reported third quarter results and gave an outlook that showed bookings, according to analysts, were kind of this weak spot of the print. How are your bookings holding up?
Yeah, what we're seeing is we're obviously on a very, very different scale from Accenture.
Yeah.
But we are seeing pretty solid bookings, and I think that is because of the way we're going to market. So again, if you're not trying to tie a customer into a really long-term, complicated contract, and instead you're focused on 8-week sprints, 12-week sprints that have real outcomes and real ROI, it's a whole lot easier to get that through kind of this uncertain period.
But it's a lot more work for you guys, right? And then the visibility isn't there either.
It's a lot more work for us, but we have a lot of confidence in our execution, and we've proven time and time again that when we do an awesome job and deliver great results, we get the opportunity to do the next thing and the next thing. And by the way, we've been building our capabilities so that we have even more opportunities to leverage that approach across now all major cloud platforms, ServiceNow capabilities, of course, on-prem infrastructure and devices. So there's a lot of places to move.
Okay, interesting. We're watching a lot of what's happening when it comes to the big AI stories of like acquisitions, or don't call it an acquisition, actually. Investment from Meta Platforms, excuse me.
Right.
Not an acquisition.
Right. It's not.
And everyone's trying to figure out the real beneficiaries of this technology. They certainly have from the perspective of the NVIDIAs of the world. From your seat, where does it look like we're going to start seeing the beneficiaries of AI in non-tech companies?
Oh, man. I mean, so for sure, there are developments already happening at an incredibly rapid pace in healthcare around patient outcomes and personalized care. There are already amazing developments underway in education, personalized tutors, that kind of thing.
Joyce, forgive us. The president speaking, we've got to run. Joyce Mullen at Inside Enterprises. To President Trump we go, making some comments.
You would call up Israel and request that they stop their airstrikes. Will you make that request?
Well, I think it's very hard to make that request right now. If somebody's winning, it's a little bit harder to do than if somebody's losing. But we're ready, willing, and able, and we've been speaking to Iran, and we'll see what happens.
Mr. President, what was the thought process behind the 2-week timetable?
Just time to see whether or not people come to their senses.
And Mr. President, do you think the Europeans helped at all in talking with the Iranians?
No, they didn't help. No. Iran doesn't want to speak to Europe. They want to speak to us. Europe is not going to be able to help in this one.
20 years ago, you were skeptical of a Republican administration that attacked a Middle East country on the idea of questionable intelligence of weapons of mass destruction. How is this moment different with Iran?
Well, there were no weapons of mass destruction. I never thought there were. And that was somewhat pre-nuclear. There was a nuclear age, but nothing like it is today. And it looked like I'm right about the material that they've gathered already. It's a tremendous amount of material. And I think within a matter of weeks, or certainly within a matter of months, they're going to be able to have a nuclear weapon. We can't let that happen. I was very much opposed to Iraq. I said it loud and clear, but I was a civilian, but I guess I got a lot of publicity. But I was very much opposed to the Iraq war. And I actually did say, don't go in, don't go in, don't go in. But I said, if you're going to go in, keep the oil. But they didn't do that.
What intelligence do you have that Iran is building a nuclear weapon? Your intelligence community has said they have no evidence that they are at this point.
Well, then my intelligence community is wrong. Who in the intelligence community said that?
Your director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard.
She's wrong.
Mr. President, are the Chinese in any way helping Iran in this moment? We're hearing reports of mysterious planes landing in Iran from China.
I don't know. They say that they're there to take people out, but I can't tell you about that. I get along very well with China, get along very well with President Xi. I like him. He likes me. We have a very good relationship. We'll see what happens. I can't imagine them getting involved.
Is this decision that you need to make on Iran, whether to strike militarily, is this the biggest decision you will have to make as president?
Well, I can't tell you that. I have to see what happens. I can't, really say that. It depends what the decision is, but I wouldn't really be able to tell you that now. I'll tell you in about a year from now, maybe 5 years or 10 years from now. You never know about decisions. You never really know.
Would you support a ceasefire while the negotiations happen?
I might, depending on the circumstances.
Would you?
Former Congressman Matt, it's very hard to stop. I will say this. It's very hard to stop when you look at it. Israel's doing well in terms of war, and I think you would say that Iran is doing less well. It's a little bit hard to get somebody to stop.
Leo Cosgrove with Zero Hedge. Former Congressman Matt Gaetz threw out an interesting idea suggesting that if you were to broker a deal where nuclear inspectors go into both Israel and Iran, that you could win a Nobel Peace Prize, and they might even rename it the Trump Peace Prize. Did you hear those? What do you think of that?
Well, they should give me the Nobel Prize for Rwanda, and if you look the Congo, or you could say Serbia, Kosovo, you could say a lot of them. You could say, the big one is India and Pakistan. I should have gotten it 4 or 5 times. I should get it for the, I would think the Abraham Accords would be a good one too.
But what do you
they won't give me a Nobel Peace Prize because they only give it to liberals.
Would you support Iran being able to have nuclear, or would you support Iran being able to have civilian nuclear energy capabilities up to 3.76%?
They're sitting on the top of one of the largest piles of oil in the world. I just don't know why they need that for civilian work. It's one thing for certain countries to say, hey, I want to have a certain amount where I can go nuclear a little bit because we need it for electricity, we need it for air conditioners, etc. But when you're sitting on one of the largest oil piles anywhere in the world, it's a little bit hard to see why you need that. Yeah.
Are you concerned that Iran or its proxies would wage terror attacks against American targets abroad if you order military action?
We're always concerned about that, and we have to take them out and be very strong. You're even in danger talking to me right now. Do you know that? You are in danger talking to me right now. So I should probably get out of here, but you guys are actually in danger. Can you believe it?
One more. Mr. President, is it still your expectation that NATO countries spend 5% of their GDP on defense spending?
Well, I think they should do that. I don't think we should, but I think they should. We've been supporting NATO so long. In many cases, I believe paying almost 100% the cost. So I don't think we should, but I think that the NATO countries should, absolutely.
And if a country like Spain decides not to?
Well, NATO's going to have to deal with Spain. Spain's been a very low payer. They were always a very low payer. They were either good negotiators or they weren't doing the right thing. I think Spain has to pay what everybody else has to pay. Spain has been notorious for low pay. You know who else was a low payer, just about the lowest? A place called Canada. Because Canada said, why should we pay when the United States will protect us free? And they've been right about that.
ICE?
Russia, Ukraine, you've been making progress towards a peace deal, but I don't know if you know this, but Lindsey Graham and Mike Pompeo were there on the ground in Ukraine, seemingly doing the opposite, trying to provoke the Ukrainians to keep fighting. What do you think of that?
Well, we're going to see, and people have to be very careful with what they say. They got to be very careful with their mouth, because their mouth can get them into a lot of trouble.
One more. ICE has said that they're trying to arrest up to 3,000 individuals a day. There are some communities that are saying they are fearful of being wrongfully detained or separating some families, even if they're undocumented. Is the fear in some of these communities worth the deportations of these undocumented individuals, a mass deportation program?
It's a tough subject because, look, we have farmers. I love farmers. I won 80%, 85% of the farmers. and I love them, and I'm never going to do anything to hurt our farmers. And you can also say the leisure business, etc. There are some businesses where you have a disproportionate amount of people that are the people that you're talking about. At the same time, we have to get the criminals out of our country. And we're looking at doing something where, in the case of good, reputable farmers, they can take responsibility for the people that they hire and let them have responsibility, because we can't put the farms out of business. And at the same time, we don't want to hurt people that aren't criminals. Most of the people that came in over the last 3 years under Biden, I would say probably 3.5 to 4 years, those people, you have a lot of criminals, you have a lot of, I mean, we're looking at that very closely. You've had people that have worked on farms for 20 years. It's very hard to go in there and say, you know, you're coming out. But we're going to let the farmers take responsibility. They're great people. They'll do it. They know the good and the bad. So the hard part about this is not like a normal war where people wear uniforms. They don't wear uniforms. But we have murderers that came out of the last 4 years. We have murderers. We have drug lords. We have people that we don't want to. We have prisoners. They emptied out Venezuela and many countries. They emptied out their prisons into the United States. We have to get those people out. But we have stone-cold murders, 11,888 murders. We've already gotten a lot of them out of here, but we don't want them. So we have to be careful. But I never want to hurt our farmers. Our farmers are great people. They keep us happy and healthy and fat.
Are there other cities that you're going to try to replicate what you've done in Los Angeles?
Well, I mean, we had a big victory last night in the Court of Appeals with respect to Los Angeles, but really the country, where Gavin Newsom, who's really an incompetent governor, he's just doing a terrible job between his fires, between all the houses burning down, his forest fires, and now Los Angeles. If we didn't go to Los Angeles, and the sheriff admitted it, he had no control. He would have lost control. We saved Los Angeles by having the military go in. And the second night was much better. The third night was nothing much. And the fourth night, nobody bothered even coming. We put out that fire. We did a great job of it. He sued us for going in and for helping him. We went and helped him. Right now, you'd have Los Angeles burning to the ground. Largely, it would have already been destroyed.
You don't want your legacy, Mr. President, to be that of a peacemaker? Do you worry that striking Iran would change that?
Always a peacemaker. That doesn't mean sometimes you need some toughness to make peace, but always a peacemaker.
Can you win in Iran without ground forces?
Say it?
Is an aerial campaign in Iran enough, or do you need ground forces?
Well, I'm not going to talk about ground forces. The last thing you want to do is ground forces.
Does Iran have 2 weeks, or could you strike before that? Are you essentially giving them a 2-week timeline?
I'm giving them a period of time. We're going to see what that period of time is, but I'm giving them a period of time, and I would say 2 weeks would be the maximum.
Mr. President, do you think deportations should focus on criminals or all the people who are here illegally?
Should start focusing on criminals, and that's what we've been focused on. Very bad criminals, dangerous criminals.
But Stephen Miller said to go out and arrest every person who's here illegally. He's told ICE to arrest everyone who's here illegally.
Stephen and I have a very good understanding. He's a terrific person. We have a great understanding.
Mr. President, if there is an attack on U.S. assets, will you promise to conduct a full investigation and make it transparent with the American people before blaming Iran for such an attack?
Well, if there's an attack, we'll know almost immediately with modern equipment who made the attack, and those people will be very, very unhappy.
Prime Minister,
I want to get you people out of danger. You're in danger standing with me.
One more. Prime Minister Netanyahu said that they had the capacity to take out all of Iran's nuclear facilities. So what role would the U.S. be able to play, and why would they, if Israel says that they have all of the abilities their own military?
I'm not sure he said that, but they really have a very limited capacity. They can break through a little section, but they can't go down very deep. They don't have that capacity, and we'll have to see what happens. Maybe it won't be necessary. Maybe it won't be necessary.
Would you like to see Congress pass a bill that bans child transgender surgeries?
Well, I know they're talking about it, aren't they? We're going to have to see how it comes to me in what form. Certainly, it's been something I've been talking about also. Okay?
Thank you, Mr. President. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, you've been listening to President Trump there in Morristown, New Jersey. Assumption is that he is en route to his golf course and club there in Bedminster, New Jersey. But again,
he's making his way to Marine One, the helicopter right now.
So he is making. We were curious about kind of where and how and what.
He took an airplane from D.C.
Correct.
Earlier. Landed. He was just at the airport in Morristown, and now he's getting on Marine One.
So where's he going then? I guess
he's going to Bedminster. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's going to land there. Yeah. Okay. So again, a bunch of headlines. Let's get to Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall. She's in our DC News Bureau. A lot there. Certainly a lot to do with Israel and Iran. What is it that the Bloomberg audience needs to know from what we just heard from the president, Tyler?
Yeah, hey, Carol. Well, President Trump said that 2 weeks is the maximum that he's going to give Iran before he makes a decision on whether or not the U.S. would join in on the offensive when it comes to the Israeli strikes. He did say that he might support a ceasefire. Of course, he had previously said that he's not looking for a ceasefire here. In his words, he is looking for something much greater, often alluding to wanting Iran to completely abandon its nuclear ambitions. He did say that Israel has limited capacity when it comes to the sort of strikes that they could take at the Fordo nuclear site. Of course, this is one of those areas that we have been closely tracking because that's really what analysts tell us that the U.S. would need to step in and assist with when it comes to the Israeli operation there on the ground. But he said that maybe that won't be necessary. Of course, this all tracks after we have seen what has been sort of a toned down rhetoric out of this White House after Caroline Leavitt yesterday said that she opened the door to a diplomatic de-escalation, saying that the president would make this decision within 2 weeks.
What about when it comes to who Iran is speaking to and the negotiations that are happening right now? Because we did hear the president say Iran wants to speak to the U.S. and not to Europe. He said Europe, he said, is not going to be able to help with the Israel-Iran conflict. He just said this moments ago. Does that mean that the U.S. is going to have direct talks with Iranian leaders to try to resolve this conflict?
Well, President Trump did say that the U.S. has been in touch with Iran, and it was also interesting to hear him say that Iran doesn't want to talk to Europe, even as we know that Iran's foreign minister did meet today in Geneva with some European counterparts, including the United Kingdom, France, and Germany. Yesterday, we should say that the UK's foreign minister, Lammy, was at the White House meeting directly with Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. And in the readout that we got after from the State Department, they did say that they agreed that their ultimate goal is that Iran should never be able to obtain a nuclear weapon. So we're going to watch very closely here how these potential negotiations do end up evolving here, because we know that this White House, for example, has been in touch with some other world leaders. That includes President Trump earlier this week, confirming that he had multiple phone calls with Russian President Vladimir Putin. He also met for lunch with Pakistan's army chief, both, of course, strategic allies of Iran who have offered to mediate in this conflict. Though up to this point, it really does remain to be seen if those countries would play a significant role in any sort of talks going forward.
You know, Tyler, we've been watching the trade here, and it looks like we're going to end maybe on a down note here. Obviously, we're all focused on what's going on in the Middle East and between Israel and Iran specifically, and what the U.S. role might be going forward. Having said that, there's also the tariff and trade talks that continue on. President did just say it looks like we're going to be making a trade deal with India and also with Pakistan. And I think earlier there were some concerns about maybe it wasn't going so well between the U.S. and Japan. All of this continues to go on as well.
Definitely, and we have a lot of timelines on the table here, Carol. Of course, July 9th is that timeline for the so-called reciprocal tariff negotiations to be done. We actually heard from the European Union yesterday, who did say their officials that they are making progress with the U.S., but that if ultimately they're not able to make a deal, they are preparing their own retaliatory tariffs to go into effect if progress isn't made or we don't see some sort of extension. Of course, we are looking out if we could potentially see some sort of extension here after the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent testified on Capitol Hill earlier this week that was highly likely for those countries that are making progress and have been prioritized, including India, including Japan. So it does appear that the administration wants to show some sort of forward movement here, since up to this point, we really haven't seen anything besides for earlier this week, was it, that President Trump was at the G7 standing next to the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and they had put they inked their signatures on that framework that we had gotten between the US and the UK.
That was this week, but Tyler, you are not alone in thinking that this has been the longest, shortest week of our lives, I think. I think it's fair to say.
It's a lot of stuff. It's really like, where am I? Who am I? What day is it? Tyler Kendall, thank you so much. She knows where she is. She is in the nation's capital at the Washington News Bureau for Bloomberg News. We just want to point out, while the president was making those comments, there was also a comment on his social media site.
Hold on.
Yeah, well.
Hold on. You're saying that while he was speaking, he also posted to True Social at the exact same time?
Somebody did.
Okay, interesting.
And it basically writes about a possible deal that might be announced over next week having to do with Harvard. He basically said people have been asking about what's going on with Harvard University. We have been working closely with Harvard. It's very possible that a deal will be announced over the next week or so. They have acted extremely appropriately during these negotiations and appear to be committed to doing what is right. So if a settlement is made on the basis that is currently being discussed, it will be mind-bogglingly historic and very good for our country. So we'll see. We know that there's been a back and forth, certainly about their tax status and some different things, students going up, like a lot of things, money and so on, R&D.
Okay.
So we'll see what happens.
We'll keep an eye on any developments there. The president making a lot of news, just speaking to reporters on his way to his Bedminster Golf Club. Meantime, we are getting close to the end of trading here. We're just about 8 minutes away from 4 o'clock here in New York. Let's drive to the close with Karen Vera Perry, head of U.S. iShares fixed income strategy at BlackRock. She joins us from San Francisco. Always good to chat with you, Karen. Treasuries ending the week higher after a Federal Reserve official said the first of the bank's 2 projected interest rate for the year could come in July. The first interest rate cuts could come in July. What did you make of Waller's comments earlier in the day? And I'm just wondering how you're watching the movements in the fixed income market today.
Hey, Tim. Yeah, I think Waller's comments were really interesting because it almost contradicted what the Fed had just said a couple of days earlier. So when we took a look at the statement, it was pretty clear that they're on hold for now. The summary of economic projections gave us a look of a slightly higher inflation rate going forward. So that would speak to them keeping the overnight rate on hold for a little while, and then him coming in saying maybe July 30th is a live meeting on the table. But the market really didn't overreact to that. We're still seeing the Fed funds futures contract showing just 2 cuts this year, and then we could kind of run out of meetings. So these might have to come in October and December rather than in July.
You know, we talked with Peter Atwater earlier of William & Mary, also of his own firm, watches the markets, ties it all together. We talked a little bit about Fed policy, and he said, you know, watch the 10-year when it comes to what we might get from the Fed. You look at the 10-year, and it tells you what today?
It really just tells me that people are a little bit nervous out there in the market, and they want to use that flight to quality that Treasuries usually provides. I think so many people are really sticking short. So longer term Treasuries haven't always provided the ballast they're looking for. But I think on days when there is some uncertainty, we do see people coming back to long term bonds.
What about when it comes to municipal bonds?
Municipal bonds have been a really interesting story this year. So they've actually been underperforming at the beginning of the year relative to Treasuries and the rest of the fixed income markets. However, the issuance has been really low, so states and localities haven't been issuing as much. And so the yields actually started to look really good. So especially in parts of the muni market, high yield munis actually look really attractive right now. Short-term munis look really attractive. So we've seen people pretty much after April starting to come back to the muni market. We've seen a lot of flows into muni ETFs as well as the vehicle of choice for coming back into munis this year.
Gotta say, I love fund flows and love talking to someone like you guys because you see a lot of money moving around. And Karen, you and your team were kind enough to share what you saw in May. May being the largest month on record for iShares bond ETF inflows globally and the second largest month for the global bond ETF industry overall. We keep talking about the U.S. being uninvestable, perhaps, or people just looking for some diversification after being all in on the U.S. market. Tell us about your thinking of that, and also, what are you seeing in the flows as we are now almost done with the month of June?
We're still seeing so many people are actually using Treasuries as a core part of their allocations. That's been one of the biggest drivers of flows has been people coming into Treasury ETFs. SGov, which is our 0 to 3 month T-bills ETF, actually had $500 million coming in this week and about $20 billion year to date. So people are still kind of hiding in the front end, hiding in cash and using SGov to do that. An interesting trend that's really come into the flows that I haven't seen for many years is around international bonds. So the home country bias is always super strong on the equity side. And I think it's even stronger in fixed income. But we've seen probably $4 billion coming into international bond ETFs recently. And I think most of that is people looking across, wanting to diversify fixed income and not just be so tied to the dollar. And I think especially foreign currency bond ETFs, with the dollar being down about 6% year to date, we're seeing those having some positive returns just from the differences in the currencies.
Karen, you mentioned people are hiding at the front end. When they're not hiding, when they're ready to come out of hiding, where does that money go?
It's been moving slowly into either just core funds like AGG, so that tracks the U.S. aggregate index.
Okay.
We've seen some pretty heavy flows there. The belly of the curve, so people jump to kind of 3 to 7 year bonds. That's been a pretty that's been a call we've had on for quite some time. But I also think it makes a lot of sense if the Fed does start cutting. Your money market yields are going to come down. Your short duration yields are going to come down, and that's a place where you can kind of lock in 4 to 5% today. And then people are just really trying to be flexible with ways to get income. I think preferred stocks actually look pretty good right now. It's about 70% financials. But our PFF ETF that holds those securities is yielding over 6%. So I think people can look beyond bonds and look into other income generators to kind of buffer some of the volatility they've been seeing.
I think I've said this before, and maybe our timing's just good, but you're like the perfect voice to talk to in a week where we've had a Fed meeting and, of course, watching the fixed income market so closely. Karen, thanks so much. Have a great weekend, safe weekend. Karen Vera-Perry, head of U.S. iShares Fixed Income Strategy over at BlackRock, joining us once again from San Francisco. Folks, just about 2.5 minutes to go until we wrap up the trade for the day and for the week overall. Looking at equities, going to pretty much close near their lows of the session, just rounding out a little move to the upside, but just down about 14 points on the S&P 500, up about 21 on the Dow Jones Industrial Average, down 100 points on the NASDAQ 100. Do not go anywhere. Heading over to our TV colleagues, counting you down to the close, wrapping up the trade. Closing bell starts right now.
The Closing Bell, Bloomberg's comprehensive cross-platform coverage of the U.S. market close starts right now.
And right now, we are 2 minutes away from the end of the trading day. Romaine Bostic alongside Scarlett Fu, taking you through to the closing bell with a global simulcast. It's already started. There's Carol Massar and Tim Stenovic in the radio booth. Scarlett Fu, of course, by my side. Alex Steele off on the day as we welcome our audiences across all of our Bloomberg platforms. Carol Massar, you're smiling. The market isn't
because
smiling.
it's Friday.
No, yeah, it is Friday. Thank God, thank God. Yeah, I know, it's kind of a funny market. I keep thinking about this story that was on the terminal about Goldman and Citi seeing Europe's economy powering the stock rally, and it made me look at the MSCI Europe Index. It is up about 5.5% year to date. S&P, folks, just up about 1.5%. So it'll be interesting to see if this trade takes us all the way till the end of this year.
You're already thinking about the end of the year?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, I'm just thinking about next week and what we hear from Jay Powell on Tuesday and Wednesday when he's on Capitol Hill. Are we going to hear anything different than we heard from him on Wednesday when he was at the press conference? Are the lawmakers going to get any additional answers out of him?
Certainly, he's not going to settle the debate between Chris Waller and Harker, right? Like, that's not going to be resolved in his 2 appearances on Capitol Hill. I just think about the number of people who have said the stock market is priced to, be kind of best case scenario, even with this wall of worry that we face, whether it's geopolitics, whether it's trade developments, whether it's continued U.S. pushes to, restrict technology to China. There are all these things that typically would sink a lot of sectors, but isn't really.
Yeah, we had a guest on a couple of weeks ago, I thought put it best. He said kind of the best case scenario has already been priced in, and the worst case scenario has actually been priced out. That was his rationale for why we've been in such a tight trading range. We were in a tight trading range this week. In fact, I'll double check these numbers, but this actually might be the tightest trading range on the S&P on a weekly basis all year long. You see that reflected in the daily numbers on your screen with the Dow Jones Industrial Average hugging that 42,200 level, up about 30 points or just about 0.1% on the day. Meanwhile, the S&P closes once again below that 6,000 level, down about 13 points or 0.2%. The NASDAQ indices each down roughly about 0.5% on the day, while the Russell 2000 is going to close out the day lower by just about 4 points or about 0.2%.
All right, back to the S&P 500 I go. go. And folks, a little bit of a more positive tilt. Scarlett, you've got 298 names in the S&P 500 gaining ground on this Friday, 202 to the downside, 3 unchanged.
All right, let's take a look at the IMAP. Pretty much a mixed picture there as well. You've got 5 sectors in the green, 6 are in the red. The worst performances are communications services companies down 1.8%. After that, materials and healthcare each losing about 0.5%. On the upside, energy stocks gaining more than 1% on the day. Consumer staples and financials also finishing higher.
All right, to the individual gainers. Kroger, number 1 gainer in the S&P, nation's largest supermarket operator. Sales surpassing expectations. Comp sales coming in better than expectations, too. This is during the latest quarter. So consumers are still spending on groceries and other essentials, even amid economic turbulence. So the company raised its full-year guidance, reaffirmed the rest of its outlook, citing an uncertain, though, macroeconomic environment. So Kroger, as I said, number 1 gainer in the S&P 500. That stock up just shy of 10%. CarMax, an outperformer, up 9.5% at its highs, finishing with a 6.5% gain. Number 3 gainer in the S&P 500 reported first quarter comp sales and earnings per share that beat consensus estimates. Stock, though, is still down about 17% year to date. 8% of the float is shorted, so there's still some investors certainly with a wary eye to that one. GMS, this one up almost 24%. This company definitely in demand. Home Depot making an offer for the building product distributor, possibly setting off a bidding war with QXO, which this week made a $5 billion offer for the company. The Wall Street Journal reporting this out initially yesterday. QXO has come out and said it will not raise its $5 billion offer for the company, so keep an eye on this one. We'll probably watch that into next week. And
I love a good old-fashioned bidding war. I mean, I guess it's not a bidding war if QXO doesn't do anything, but close enough.
Okay, close enough.
Yeah.
We're gonna at least go with it. This is what I'm doing because Tim's like, Carol, you have to do Circle if you don't do anything else. Oh, wow. Circle Internet up another 20% today. This is the company behind USDC, second largest stablecoin by market share. Its shares rallying again in today's session. It's up about 670, maybe 70%. I meant to check the DES screen. It is up a lot since its IPO earlier this month.
We'll just round up, 700%.
Seaport Global, though, came out and gave it its first buy rating in the wake of the U.S. Senate's move this past week to pass legislation setting up regulatory rules for cryptocurrencies pegged to the dollar. So, yeah, a super outperformer here. You're welcome.
About time you
You're
did
welcome.
Circle, okay?
I know,
It's been
you're
up like every day.
He's been on my case.
I have. Hey, I want to get to the decliners. NVIDIA shares falling today by about 1.2%. I watched shares of chip companies after the Journal reported that the U.S. Commerce Department, or rather an official in the U.S. Commerce Department, has told top semi companies that he wants to revoke those waivers they've used to access American tech in China. We saw Lam Research fall, Applied Materials, KLA. They're among the biggest decliners in these stocks. NVIDIA, though, also falling today about 1.2%. Also, keep an eye on shares of Accenture. They were down as much as close to 11% after the company reported results. Analysts highlighted bookings as a weak spot. Bookings were down 7%. Bloomberg Intelligence says that decline lower suggests soft discretionary IT demand. The CEO in the earnings call, Julie Sweet, said the company, quote, continues to see a significantly elevated level of uncertainty in the global economic and geopolitical environment as compared to calendar year 2024. Interestingly, though, as opposed to what we saw with Booz Allen a few weeks ago, the company said that the federal business division had an immaterial impact on the overall growth of the quarter. Shares down 6.9% today. And finally, Smith & Wesson Brands. I didn't realize this was such a small market cap company. It's like $380 million company, $386 million company. Shares down 20% today. They reported adjusted earnings per share for the fourth quarter that missed the average analyst estimate. The president and CEO, Mark Smith, said, looking at the overall firearms market, we continue to see consumers generally being cautious due to macroeconomic factors pressuring discretionary spending. So people are pulling back on all kinds of purchases, I guess, at least according to the CEO of Smith & Wesson.
All right, let's take a quick look at yields here. Modest declines across the curve here on this Friday afternoon. We should point out, on a weekly basis, it's really the short end of the curve that saw most of the action. seeing yields there drop for a second straight week. Meanwhile, on the longer end of the curve, 10 to 30 years, you actually had an increase in yields here. So a steepening of the yield curve. In fact, the biggest steepening that we've seen in about a month on a weekly basis. And that, of course, is the setup heading into next week and beyond as folks, Carol, start to refocus in on macro conditions and especially on the labor market.
Yeah, and so well set up for what we want to talk about because July 3rd is our next monthly labor report. And we saw a story about what's going on in terms of consultants to the U.S. government. And we talk about thousands of private government consultants are flooding the labor market after being laid off during the Trump administration's cost-cutting efforts. We're talking about job postings among 7 consulting companies singled out by the General Services Administration for contract cuts are down 27% since 2023 and 11% lower from a year ago. And you just wonder how this all starts to trickle into some of the labor data points and the impact on the economy.
And that includes Accenture, which I think which Tim was just talking about. But I'm curious, too, as somebody who lived in Washington, I mean, the ripple effects of this can be pretty enormous. Exactly. I mean, this is a huge ecosystem. Remember, it's not just that one person's job, but it's everything that sort of goes into supporting the communities around that. And if these people are out of work and you're seeing less activity, I do wonder what that means for the region.
Look, I heard just this anecdote a couple months ago about somebody who did lose his job as a result of Doge cuts. He was mentioning that at his kid's school, there were several households where both parents had lost work because one was a consultant, but these are all in the D.C. area. And you saw, but the question is, and since then, which of those jobs have actually come back at this point? And also, I mean, is there demand in other sectors or other industries for these folks who aren't necessarily finding it with these consulting roles that for so long seemed really consistent and, you know, were there all the time?
Yeah, these are open questions, and it's going to take a while for it to all shake out, but it's certainly really devastating news for those who are affected, especially in that region. We've got another story that we're keeping an eye on here, and, you know, Meta has done a really good job with these smart glasses. They're Ray-Ban smart glasses that our senior producer, Queenette, wears around the office all the time.
Does she?
Yes, oh my gosh. Whenever she's talking to herself and walking around with glasses on, it's because she's wearing those AI glasses. Well, Meta is now launching these new smart glasses models with Oakley, which is aimed at athletes, and they're going to enable video recording. They also have water resistance. There's a quote from a Meta executive who says that he's seen a lot of performance use cases with the Ray-Bans, like people wearing them on roller coasters, cycling, and being around water. Can you imagine wearing these things like on the roller coaster? They're like $400 if it falls out.
You just got to hold on to them while you're wearing them. You know, Matt Miller was talking about these earlier today on Open Interest, and he did not think these are cool looking. I hadn't seen pictures of them when I was hearing him talk about them. These aren't bad. They kind of look like the old school Oakley frog skins from like the 80s and 90s. Remember, Luxottica owns Oakley. Luxottica also owns Ray-Ban.
They own everything.
They own everything. They don't own these glasses. They don't own these glasses.
Right, so you have the 2% of the addressable market.
Yeah, so it's the same parent company. Yeah. It kind of makes sense that this partnership happens. Yeah. Remember GoPros? Like this was the whole idea of GoPro. But I think this works.
Yeah, but I think the thing though that's smart about what Meta has been doing here is the idea of just, if you're going to take this technology, just make it look like a normal product. Like we don't need a futuristic headset or something like that. Yeah. I mean, we can talk about whether you think Oakleys are cool or not, but it gets to this idea.
So this way, when we're recording you, nobody knows that we're recording you,
I will never talk to anyone wearing glasses from this point forward, because you have no idea. See, I'm recording you right now.
There's supposed to be a light that goes on with these.
There's no light. I blacked it out.
There's supposed to be a light.
I blacked it out.
It's creepy.
Tap right now.
It's creepy. All right, guys, that's a wrap.
On TikTok tonight.
Have a good weekend. Our cross-platform on radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. We call it the closing bell. Romaine and Scarlett continuing there on TV. Tim and I continuing right here on Bloomberg Business Week Daily on Bloomberg Radio. We'll see you again, same time, same place on Monday.
This is Bloomberg Business Week Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week Daily with Carol Masser and Tim Stenivek, live on Bloomberg Radio, television, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals.
It is Bloomberg Business Week Daily. That's Carol Masser. I'm Tim Stenivek. What a week for a 4-day week,
Did you
Carol.
forget who you were for a moment?
No, what did I say? I said I'm Tim Stenivek.
Okay.
Did I?
I don't know. You paused.
Oh, sometimes,
like you weren't so sure. It's been that kind of a week.
I was actually thinking about the shortened trading week.
Yeah,
Today,
I know.
I've had several
Doesn't
people
feel
come up to
short.
me and say it feels like Monday today.
Feels like 2 weeks.
For me, it feels like Friday. I don't know.
Yeah.
I always know it's Friday when David Weston is in here. He is the host of Bloomberg Wall Street Week. He joins us here in the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. David, a full week of fighting between Israel and Iran, a U.S. president who will decide within 2 weeks whether to strike Iran or at least get more involved.
Yeah, he says he will decide.
He says he will.
I mean, not every deadline President Trump has set is actually honored. Is my impression.
That is a good point.
I could be wrong.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on with that. We did hear from the Federal Reserve's Jay Powell at the fourth meeting in a row where the Fed did not move rates. Deals, deals, deals when it comes to the world of AI. These are kind of just some of the things that for the backdrop of tonight's episode of Bloomberg Wall Street Week with David Weston. Tonight at 6 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Radio and Television. I want to start with the Middle East.
Okay.
Because Carol and I have been talking about this nonstop since last Friday when we were in here as this war was unfolding. Now, in the past couple of days, I think we're getting flashbacks to the U.S. invasion of Iraq and weapons of mass destruction, and this idea that there were some folks who said, we cannot allow Iraq to get weapons of mass destruction. Yes, there's not going to be boots on the ground. There's not, they're not talking about regime change at this point, but it is still perhaps the U.S. getting involved in a foreign war in the Middle East over weapons of mass destruction.
Well, as always in the Middle East, there's a lot in there. First of all, not talking about regime change. I'm not sure that Israel is not talking about regime change. They're certainly walking right up to that line, it seems to me. And it does bear this similarity, I think, Tim, because I was around covering that at ABC at the time. And leading up to the war in Iraq, they kept saying, oh, we don't have them, we don't have them, we don't have them. But they'd spent all their time, Saddam Hussein had spent all of his time persuading the world he had them. And by the time it happened, it was too late. He couldn't persuade him. And now, obviously, we know that Iran has been enriching uranium, but we don't know how much or how close they are. And at some point, it gets tricky because it gets to be too late to persuade the world. It's okay, let the inspectors in, it's going to be all right. I mean, it does echo a little bit the buildup to the Iran war, without a doubt. Now, I don't think there's anybody at this point who's talking about troops on the ground, which was always what was happening in Iraq. But the main thing is, in the Middle East, it's always fraught, and it's never what it appears, in my experience. And whatever you think is happening, something else is really happening.
Yeah.
And we don't find out sometimes ever, but often not for a long time.
I kind of think about our environment. I mean, this is true at any given time, but we've got kind of local things. You've got local political races going on.
Yeah.
You've got Fed policy that impacts the country overall. And then you've got geopolitics.
Yeah.
And that's something you certainly tackled with Larry Summers this week.
We did, and I was a little surprised to start on geopolitics first with Larry. It was a little surprising. He said two things. I'm not sure I would have been surprised, but I wouldn't have predicted it necessarily. Number one, he said, it's time for the country to come together. We should be uniform at this point. This is not a time for dissension. This is not Democratic, Republican. Iran having nuclear weapons is very dangerous. We should speak with one voice. And number two, he said, we should look at the poly market. I mean, which really surprised me. He's following the poly market.
Seriously?
He said, if you look at that over time, it is more accurate than most of the pundits were.
Even with this?
And yeah, he was reciting to me the likelihood that Khamenei would have to step down by August, and the likelihood the United States would come in, and things like that. He was saying, I'd pay attention to the poly market because nobody knows exactly. And so that was sort of a surprise to me. He follows these things actually pretty closely.
David's making me go to Polymarket right now.
Exactly.
Pulling it up.
Yeah, it's sort of fascinating.
Not a site that I've gone to since the election. I will be honest with you.
Well, he pays attention to this stuff, and he says over time it's not bad. Now listen, we're stories of capitalism, right? Wall Street Week. It is capitalism, and people putting money where their mouth is. As Larry said, they're putting money where their mouth is, and so people are making predictions based on this.
Right.
And so he says it's not a bad way to follow it, which is what he's doing. So there you go. There's a tip. Something.
The first one that I see on
We've lost him now.
The first one that I see on Polymarket is who will win the Democratic nomination for New York City mayor.
That's another one that sort of surprised me with Larry, because I wanted to sort of ask him, but I wasn't sure if he was following it. And he came to me and said, no, I really want to talk about this. This is really important. He really feels strongly. Now, first of all, disclosure. The man who founded Bloomberg and is the majority shareholder, Michael Bloomberg, has endorsed Mr. Cuomo, right? And has given some money to him and things like that. But that has nothing to do with Larry. Larry's not influenced by that at all. And he is very concerned about Zoran Mamdani and what he represents, his economic plan. He says it's very dangerous. Democratic socialism, as you know, is what he's embraced. And it's a series of things we all know about, free childcare and sort of government-owned supermarkets,
free buses,
rent stabilization,
free buses, rent stabilization, a lot more taxes, real estate taxes and others on the rich, things like that. And he said it's just going to be devastating for New York. And I said, well, it's kind of parochial because it's just New York City. He said, no, New York City is the most important city in the country. And the rest of the country has to be focused on what's going on there. But more broadly, he said, this reflects sort of a fight over the heart and soul of the Democratic Party. Between people who want to go farther left and people who want to come to center. And there's really a big fight going on here that he thinks is terribly important. So he was really sort of agitated about this.
So, okay, I feel like when we talk about Larry Summers, we often lead with the Fed.
Yeah, we'll get there sooner or later.
So let's talk about, kind of his thinking there. We did have a Fed meeting, even though this felt like a very long week. It did happen on Wednesday.
Yeah, and it wasn't surprising. And Larry said they did what they should do because there's just too much uncertainty over tariffs. And certainly over oil now and a lot of different things, they did what they should do. He thought that they were absolutely reasonable, but what he really talked about was the fact that in their statement of economic projections that they took up the likelihood of inflation as well as the likelihood of unemployment. This is what he had to say about that. He thought that was exceptional.
We're imposing a supply shock on ourselves, and that's leading to expectations of both higher inflation and higher unemployment, making the Fed's job that much more difficult. And the Fed's obviously not going to get in a political war with the administration, but the stark analytic fact is clear. It doesn't happen that often that the Fed revises up on inflation and unemployment at the same time. And I don't think there's ever been a time when they revised that way in both directions based on administration policy.
And that last point, I think, is the critical one. Larry sees this as something of an own goal. This is not some external force like COVID-19 or something really disrupting supply chains. This is an own goal. The economy was basically humming along, and now we've got possible stagflation, and it's because of administrative policy. That's what he really takes issue with.
We only have about 40 seconds left, David, but there's a lot on tonight's program that we want to preview. Let's go to Saudi Arabia and talk a little bit about Aramco.
Yeah, actually, our colleague, Giovanni Spersetti, did a terrific piece interviewing the CEO of Aramco as they try to wean themselves off of oil, which I think is probably the only country in history that tries to wean itself off of oil, right? And how they're doing it, how they're committed to it. So it's a fascinating piece about what they plan to do.
And I thought you were going to go from Netflix and chill to Netflix and ride, but I don't know. Maybe that's
That's
just
on
the
tonight, too.
Maybe that's the tease. We just leave it right there. Good stuff as always.
Great to be with you. Thanks.
All right, David, thank you so much. David Weston, of course, the host of Bloomberg Wall Street Week. It's coming your way on Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg Television. Catch it at 6 p.m. Wall Street time.
Coming up next, big developments when it comes to the U.S. fight against heart disease, a leading cause of death in America. We talked to one venture capitalist who has her eye on this space. That's next on Bloomberg Business Week Daily.
It's 4:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. An up Friday for the Dow Jones Industrial Average. A down Friday for the S&P. Losing week as well there. NASDAQ had a winning week, but today it was down by 0.5%. This update is brought to you by Oracle. Attention growing businesses. Oracle's offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure for new U.S. customers with minimum financial commitment. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/Bloomberg. S&P heads into the weekend below 6,000 at 59.67, down 13, a drop of 0.2%. NASDAQ today was down 98, drop there of 0.5. The Dow up 35, a gain of just about 0.1%. For the week, the S&P down 0.1%, the Dow up 0.02%, eking out a gain. NASDAQ this week up by just about 0.2%. 10-year yield 4.37% with a 2-year 3.90%. Gold down $2.20 the ounce, down 0.1%. And West Texas Intermediate crude 74.93 a barrel, down 0.3%. Circle Internet Group shares surged 20.4% today after Seaport Global gave the company its first buy rating following the U.S. Senate's move to pass legislation setting up regulatory rules for crypto pegged to the dollar. Again, Circle Internet up today by 20.4%. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Hey, thanks so much
for the
for
record,
that update,
I don't want
Charlie
to
Pellet.
edit anything about you.
Oh, Carol.
I say you're perfect because I don't want it to go to your head.
Carol Master. I know there's plenty.
Other people, I maybe want to do some gene editing.
Change. Big news of the world of cardiology today. This crossed early this morning. Millions more Americans should be taking weight loss drugs to prevent heart disease. This according to the American College of Cardiology. Carol, exercise and a clean diet aren't always enough for heart health. This is according to the nation's top cardiology organization. They've got new recommendations out. Weight loss drugs should be used earlier, making them part of the first line of defense for obese patients.
We knew this was coming. We so knew this was coming.
I
think
didn't-
about
you
no, but I
you
think
knew
about
this. I didn't know this. This was like pretty surprising to me.
I think all the conversations we've been having with Madison Muller that
Yeah.
we're finding that more and more these drugs will help all that ails us, but we also know that being thinner is a healthier thing for most people.
And that's what these drugs do.
Yeah, exactly.
So as long as it gets you there, then according to the American College of Cardiology, that's one way to help.
Exactly. So Jenny Rook looks at a lot of this stuff, things like this too, but kind of under a bigger lens. She's the founder and managing director of Genoa Ventures. It's a VC firm that invests in, as she says, quote, the next generation of companies at the convergence of technology and biology. It does feel like we're on the cusp of something. She has invested in such companies as Interven, Brightspec, and many, many more. Some notable exits include Zymergen. Zymergen. I didn't say it right.
Yeah. And Caribou. Yeah.
And Topaz and more. She joins
right.
us here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. I'm never good at getting some of the names. Why do they make it so difficult?
Well, it's to keep out the riffraff.
No, I know there's a process, right, of how they name some of these things.
There is, but often it comes from the inspiration of the technical founders, and they might not be thinking about the rest of the world and how to communicate that science. So that's also something we help them with. Yeah.
You come by periodically, and we talk about kind of big, broad macro, but we are curious too about some of the things. I think when we last left off, we didn't get a chance to really talk about some of the things that you are excited about right now that you think are just interesting in your space that you're investing in. Take us there.
Oh, I'd love to. It seems like a great way to end the week too. I know it's been a long one, and let's have our eye on the horizon and have some exciting things. So you mentioned Caribou. You know, that was Nobel Prize winner Jennifer Doudna's first gene editing company based on her CRISPR-Cas innovation. It's a new world post CRISPR, and an evidence of that is just last month we had our first in vivo editing of a human to fix a genetic disease. And that is incredible. It's the first time that's ever happened where the treatment can go into the living body and address a problem with a gene, and that infant, in this case, is now cured of that genetic disease.
Is it, help me understand, is it just what's involved in that? Identifying the gene and then surgically going in and removing the gene?
Surgically, but with molecular. So it's like the CRISPR scissors go in at the molecular level. But you're right to ask about the process, because the whole process end to end took 6 months. which is extraordinary. Like
for this one baby.
For this one person.
Because it's molecular based.
Because it's molecular. And so they sequenced the person's entire genome. They identified what the error was that was the basis of the disease. And then they were able to design DNA to go in and replace that, basically cut and paste and replace it with a functioning gene.
One thing that came up during our conversation with Jennifer Doudna is the decline in excitement for this technology that we're seeing from venture capitalists right now. So VC money raised for gene therapy companies peaked in 2020. That was $3.3 billion then. It's been moving lower since just a few $100 million last year. This is according to data from Dealforma. What's going on?
Yeah, well, I think VC money in just about every category has gone down
Except
since
AI.
2020, except AI, right? So we never learn hype cycles, right? So there has been a correction and a really retraction for, I would say, risk capital and long-term capital. And some of that is, I think it's important to take stock of the moment that this big milestone happened. So 2025, that's 25 years after the human genome was sequenced, right? So if you think about the hype cycle then, there was, oh, perhaps all genetic diseases will be cured. Well, maybe one day, but it does take time. And so I think
that was the hype cycle in 2000?
In 2000,
Okay,
right.
so then now in 2025, what's the hype cycle related to this now that we saw this baby experience this gene editing?
Well, what I would say it's now delivering on that promise, but it is a reminder that investors need to inform themselves about the challenges between the promise and the potential and the actual reality of delivering on that.
Well, like, what did it cost to do this?
It was expensive.
It's expensive.
I read some commentary on it that we shouldn't extrapolate too much from this because there were a few unique elements here. One is that the alternative, if this didn't work, was a really bad shortened life for the baby. So the downside, potential downside. So the risks of this do outweigh the benefits rather outweigh the risks because the downside was basically death.
Correct. Yeah. And so it's a doesn't apply necessarily immediately to all things that we might want to do for our genomes, right? And health overall, but it's a start, right? It's a great place to start in terms of that risk reward. And just like any innovation in these technologically driven spaces, the cost comes down over time. So it starts expensive and then we keep moving. What's interesting about this time though, it is an N of 1, but the approach was quite modular. It's sequence the whole genome, find the error, design a sequence that goes in, deliver, and all of those modules can be reused.
So is this already being done to other babies? Do we know?
I know that there are some in research, yeah.
And what about to adults?
I think that's probably a slightly longer timeline. And gene therapy is not my particular expertise, although I'm a geneticist by training. So I think the timeline for that is really going to depend on some of these other questions you were asking, like how much does it cost and how does the risk reward play out? Yeah.
I do think about though, like for the application of something like cancer, Alzheimer's, like so many things, like it just depends, right? And this is not something that's going to happen overnight. I'm excited about it. That whole idea of genetics, because I do feel like as much as we know about the body, there's so much we still don't know.
Little.
And the use of using the body to fix things.
Yes.
Is that something that excites you?
Can I give you a new example?
Yes.
Have you heard of exosomes?
No.
Okay. Exosomes. So you know about cells, right? Cells are kind of like bubbles. They're the components of the body. They contain our DNA and the proteins and everything else that's going on. Exosomes are little tiny bubbles that bubble off of the bubbles, little blebs.
Right.
And best we know, they are a communication mechanism between all those cells. So they come off of a cell and they have little packets of information. They have some of the proteins. They have some of the RNA. There are 30 trillion cells in a human body. There are 3,000 trillion exosomes in a body. So there's 100 times, 2 orders of magnitude more of these little vesicles moving around.
Ton of information.
So much information.
Right.
And we're just now figuring out what they are and what they're talking about.
We've spoken to you twice this year, and I think both times was after major cuts were announced to American universities and to research.
Yeah.
You were
To bring us back to earth here.
Well, that's what I want to do, because at the time you were very concerned about what this would do to the pipeline of innovation.
I was feeling optimistic. You know?
I know, but I
But go
think
ahead.
I need to bring us back to it because what we're seeing, what we are seeing are anecdotal stories. I've seen some headlines of people's therapies like stuck in the freezer in some cases, and they can't access that because of cuts that we've seen. Are you any more optimistic now?
I think we talked last time, I'm long-term optimistic, right? These are long-term plays. We will continue to have innovation. We will continue to have impact. But we are still on a trajectory where significant retraction in funding for these kinds of innovations will mean the pace thereof and their ability to have impact on people's lives will be delayed.
Because so much of initial ideas comes out of academia or so on and so forth.
That's right.
That's where it all starts.
That's where the basic research happens, where someone like Dr. Downa, who's curious, says, well, what if we try? And you don't know whether it's going to work.
Are you looking increasingly at, or potentially thinking that you're going to be looking at firms that are started in other countries because that's where the researchers have gone? Is that starting to happen?
We have always looked over globally, because we're always looking for the best idea regardless.
But you know what I mean? Like, is it going to be less U.S. or no? Do you think that, which is so part of, I feel like, the U.S. innovation or innovative fabric?
Yeah.
Like,
what I am seeing immediately is a shift of early stage risk capital to focus more on startups outside of the U.S., which we've never seen before. We've actually seen some of the firms kind of in our network say, we were looking at that company in the U.S., but there's so much uncertainty now, we think we'll perhaps focus closer to home.
What is close? Look, it depends on who you're talking to, but there's no startup ecosystem like the U.S. startup ecosystem. I think that's fair to say. If you think regionally or geographically, what should investors be looking at outside of the U.S.?
Well, there's extraordinary innovation happening all over the world, but a lot of interesting work in the UK and Europe broadly, where there's wonderful basic research happening. And because there's better information transfer and tool transfer now globally, those same startups can kind of get things going.
What about China?
China is a little more opaque to us, right? But there's certainly, again, extraordinary innovation happening there, and a lot of, I would say, government support for translating it.
Do people think of the shifts in R&D as just an one administration thing?
Is it just an administration thing? It's certainly heavily weighted by, that some of those choices in funding availability, in the certainty thereof, and also the regulatory landscape.
Okay, so I guess my question is, are they thinking that after President Trump finishes up his second term, could it possibly the pendulum swing back to the way it was? Just got about 30 seconds.
Sure. Hopefully, we will see over time, increased support for this kind of innovation because it is so important. But some pruning is irreversible. If you're a gardener and you overprune a tree, it just never quite recovers. It'll never be the same.
As my husband likes to remind me when I have my chainsaw out and I'm cutting off a branch.
Seriously. I need to borrow that chainsaw, by the way. Can you bring it from New Jersey? Can I take it back on the train?
It's a baby chainsaw.
I know, you told me, but it's like just the size we need.
I know. It's like, oh my God, you would love it. Jenny Roque, we love when you're here.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad we could go this route with you today. Jenny Roque, founder and managing director of Genoa Ventures. Coming up next, Jenny Glazer, the CEO of the nonprofit Cookbook.
It's 4:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. The Dow higher, the S&P, NASDAQ both lower, and it is on to the weekend. And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by Home Title Lock. Homeowners, when was the last time you checked your home title? Go to HometitleLock.com/Bloomberg for a free title history report to make sure you're not already the victim of title fraud. That's HometitleLock.com/Bloomberg. S&P 500 index down 13, another losing week. Today it fell 0.2%, finishing the week at 59.67. The Dow up 35, up 0.1%. NASDAQ down 0.5%. The 10-year 4.37% with a 2-year 3.90%. Gold down $2.90 the ounce to 33.67, down 0.1%. And West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.3% at 74.93 a barrel. As for the Federal Reserve, Karen Verapari is BlackRock head of U.S. iShares fixed income strategy, and she was a guest right here on Bloomberg Business Week Daily.
We're still seeing the Fed funds futures contract showing just 2 cuts this year, and then we could kind of run out of meetings, so these might have to come in October and December rather than in July.
Karen Verapari, BlackRock head of U.S. iShares fixed income strategy. Sources tell Bloomberg Tesla is set to open its first showrooms in India in July, kicking off formal operations in the world's 3rd biggest automobile market. Tesla today eked out a gain up less than 0.1%. And for on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Hey, thanks so much for that update, Charlie. Do appreciate it. It is Pride Month, and this story I did not hear about, Carol, until doing research for this next interview. Over in Europe, the mayor of Budapest vowed to ignore a police decision to ban the city's annual Pride Parade, setting up a showdown with nationalist Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Police cited a recently approved law cracking down on LGBTQ public events for banning the June 28th parade, this according to a statement on Thursday. The decision followed the mayor's attempt to circumvent an earlier ban by helping to organize the parade under the capital's authority. So the idea of Pride Month and everything happening with Pride Month and the pullback that we've seen from companies, not just happening here in the U.S.
No, you bring out a good point. A survey of corporate execs revealed that 2 in 5 were scaling back Pride Month engagement this year, leaving organizers scrambling for funds. And then back in May, New York City Pride announced it was looking at a $750,000 budget shortfall and launched a community fundraising campaign to keep the event free to attend. There's a lot going on here, Tim.
Yeah, Jenny Glazer's all over it. Jenny, CEO of the nonprofit think tank Cokewool. Jenny joins us from Brooklyn. Jenny, this not surprising to you. I could see you nodding as we were reading this. Cokewool, though, out with a new report. Pride under pressure. This is not necessarily a new phenomenon this year that we've seen this kind of happening over the last couple of years. What did you find in the survey?
Well, we've really found that safety isn't guaranteed anymore, not even at work. We found that 21% of LGBTQ plus professionals in the U.S. say that they or their families have been harmed by rising hate crimes. That fear doesn't stop at the door. It affects how people live, where they work, and whether they feel safe to be themselves. One lesbian professional in South Africa told us she hides indoors when she visits her hometown. She said, going outside, you're just going to get 10 comments telling you that you're going to hell or worse. What we're finding is the backlash isn't staying outside the office, it's walking in the door.
Why did you feel like you needed to do this report?
Because LGBTQ plus inclusion affects more people than you think. Globally, 9% of adults identify as LGBTQ plus, and nearly half non-LGBTQ plus professionals have a close friend or family member in the community. That means nearly 1 in 2 workers are directly invested in how LGBTQ plus people are treated. And these professionals cut across race, caste, class, gender, disability, and more. Inclusion for this group isn't about checking a box. It's about understanding how a culture really works.
Jenny, why do you think we're seeing such a pushback in America when it comes to this issue. And I think it's safe to say when you look at political elections, certainly the presidential, half of America seems to feel one way and half of America seems to feel another way. So let's be careful about lopping everybody together, right? But why did we get to this point?
I think we saw in our research that there was a sense of some of this being performative. And I think people were really asking, are systems really ready to respond? And we're finding in our data, are systems really ready to respond to bias, not just promote diversity? So we're really thinking about this as people in various parts of the country need to navigate what's happening based on laws, context, et cetera. It's very complicated.
If we were to think about acceptance as a chart or on this spectrum, and we see things getting worse right now around the world, where did things peak? When were they best? Or is that the wrong way to look at it?
Well, we did this report nearly 10 years ago, and it's very interesting to think about what the spectrum is. We really tried to think about what's changed in these past 10 years. And I think we used to think we want to make it possible so with an optimistic point of view that everyone can come and be their authentic selves at work. That's not showing up right now. And so we're really trying to think about how do we help equip leaders and individuals to really create belonging at work so that people can work productively as teams right now.
Got to say, I walked in today and there was a big sign acknowledging, Pride Month and Pride here at Bloomberg. We've had conversations, Tim and I, with various business leaders who say we're still going to do what we want to do, but we're just not going to talk about it a lot. But are companies or the corporate community, are they failing the LGBTQ community right now in some ways?
So we work with hundreds of Fortune 500 companies who are global multinationals. And what we're seeing actually is 84% of our members are doing what we call above ground, below ground, meaning they might be publicly, and one of the reasons why they're scrubbing is to protect employees, because there is a lot of attention paid on companies and it creates unintended consequences for employees. So they've really tried to think and be conservative about what's out there publicly, but they're thinking the long game. They know that creating conditions for employees to thrive at work, that people can be who they are, that they have health insurance, they can care for their loved ones. That's just a basic need that people need no matter where you are. So
Right.
we're finding that investment and focus hasn't changed.
But a slippery slope when you talk about people scrubbing, and not necessarily wanting to be identified with certain policies, it just makes me think, okay, then what's the next step, right? If the idea is not to draw attention to yourself, it's like, where do you ultimately draw the line? It's an interesting conversation to be having in a country where we so prize and value freedom of speech and freedom of thought and freedom of action, as long as you're not harming or hurting, others.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting moment in time.
It is. And keep in mind that this is the U.S. we're talking about right now. Throughout the world, again, we work with global multinationals, a third of whom are headquartered outside of the U.S. It's a very different conversation. So in the U.S., I don't think they're scrubbing to curtail, but I think they're really trying to think about how do we protect employees in this moment. And there is a lot of uncertainty and complexity. So I have a feeling over time we'll see companies come out with clearer language messaging that's more about what is the evolution of how we want to drive inclusion. So I'm seeing behind the scenes that those things are forthcoming.
Jenny, good to catch up with you. Thanks for joining us on this Friday. Do appreciate it. Jenny Glazer, the CEO of the nonprofit think tank Cokewool, joining us from Brooklyn. Taking a look at markets, how they closed out the day on this Friday, and how they closed out the week, Carol Masser.
Yeah.
We are down 0.2% today on the S&P. On the NASDAQ, down 0.5%. Next, Stocks on the move
Love this
for this
moment.
week.
You and me.
You and me. We're doing it.
You're listening to Bloomberg Business Week Daily with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, we are getting ready to wrap up on the Friday edition of Bloomberg Business Week Daily. Carol Massar, Tim Stenovec, live in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Carol Massar, Tim Stenovec. We are here, and we want to take a look at some of the stocks that were on the move this past week in our Stock Movers podcast. And we got to talk about Coinbase. It was up about 27% this week. Looking at, for the week overall, the #1 gainer in the S&P as a result. And I'm just looking at, there was a lot of data throughout the week for this one. We did get some headlines on Friday about Coinbase being cleared to offer crypto products across all EU states. So that basically enables the company to offer a full suite of products to all 27 EU member states. So we're talking about 450 million people across the EU. So that was a big deal. We also saw earlier in the week Coinbase introducing Coinbase payments for commerce platforms. So there's a lot going on in this space, especially when it comes to the regulatory environment. And we're seeing it, you know, kind of a regulatory framework being worked out. And so Coinbase certainly seen as someone as, you know, to benefit in a big way. And we certainly saw that play out in the share price this week.
Not the only mover in the crypto industry to the upside this week. You also were watching everything that happened with Circle, Carol.
Yeah, Circle Internet Group up 80% this past week, folks. big mover to the upside. It's up about 675% since its IPO on June 5th. So we have seen this one just explode to the upside. It's the company behind USDC, the second largest stablecoin by market share. Its shares gaining in the Friday trade as well. So we just saw momentum throughout the week. Catalyst today, or on Friday, I should say, Seaport Global gave the stablecoin issuer its first buy rating in the wake of the U.S. Senate's move this week to pass some regulatory legislation, right? So this is certainly something that is seen as an upside catalyst. Legislation setting up regulatory rules for cryptocurrencies pegged to the dollar. So there's a lot of momentum, I feel like, in this space.
How is it that you always have the stocks that did well?
I don't know.
You had the gainers.
My sunny disposition.
Okay, your sunny disposition.
Where are you going?
I'm going to the other side of things. The worst performers in the S&P 500 this week were solar companies, Enphase Energy, First Solar, Enphase, the ticker for Enphase Energy is ENPH. First Solar, just pulling it up here, is FSLR. First Solar fell by 17.2%. Enphase Energy fell by 21.4%. Shares of U.S. solar companies fell sharply this week. This was after we learned that Senate Republicans released this bill that would essentially end clean energy tax credits earlier than expected. What that did was it dashed hopes that major cuts passed by the House would not stick. You had other companies move lower this week. Sunrun, which is the largest U.S. rooftop panel installer, plunged this week, the most ever in intraday trading. SolarEdge Technologies fell as well, and Enphase Energy, the worst performer in the S&P 500, down by 21.4%.
Got another one for us?
I got another one. Accenture. This is an interesting one because this is a IT consulting firm.
Yeah.
Huge global company. Shares fell this week. Not the worst performer in the S&P, but still among the worst performer. I'd say top 5 worst performing stock this week, down 8.5%. The company reported results that highlighted bookings as a weak spot of the print. The company's CEO said Accenture, quote, continues to see a significantly elevated level of uncertainty in the global economic and geopolitical environment as compared to calendar year 2024. Bloomberg Intelligence came out and said that the 7% bookings decline lower headcount suggests soft discretionary IT spending demand. There were a lot of questions about the effect on government cuts, especially here in the U.S. Interestingly enough, the company said that, quote, federal business had an immaterial impact on its overall growth in the quarter. So it wasn't the federal, it was bookings moving forward.
Got it.
Is the concern that analysts have, not necessarily federal cuts. It's not like Booz Allen, which has such big exposure to the U.S. government.
So Accenture for the week overall?
Accenture for the week overall, ticker ACN, down 8.45%.
For the week overall.
Yeah.
Hey, I just want to go back to Coinbase Global because I didn't want to eat up all the time, but there was so much stuff on this name. As I mentioned, it was up about 27% this week. I forgot to mention it inked a deal to have the world's second biggest stablecoin, USDC, uses collateral in U.S. futures trading.
So there's a handshake between Circle Internet and Coinbase.
See, this is why we have the crypto dude in-house. And the other thing, the other story, this was, I think, on June 17th, you had JP Morgan Chase launching a pilot for a token called JPMD, which represents dollar deposits and will transfer a fixed amount to Coinbase Global on the public blockchain base. So there's just so much stuff this past week. I highly recommend you head to the Bloomberg or Bloomberg.com to check it out. All right, everybody. That is your stock movers for the week overall. For more conversations, check out our Stock Movers podcast, 5-minute episodes on the biggest winners and losers in the stock market. You can find Stock Movers on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere you get your podcasts. Speaking of podcasts, check out our podcast, our weekend podcast on Bloomberg Radio. Actually, our broadcast at 8 a.m. Wall Street time, but also our podcast. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts. Got to thank our team, man. It has been a busy, busy week. Just want to thank Anthony Mancini, Colin Tipton, Ariel Agami, Meredith Frank, Justin Milliner, Cece Cherendoff, Elizabeth Sedrin, and Sebastian Escobar for guiding us throughout a cray week.
It was only 4 days, Carol.
I know. How many did it feel like, guys? 2 weeks? Yeah.
Yeah, everyone's nodding.
They're like, get
we
me
got a
outta
great
here.
weekend program. Also, next week, we're here for a few days, and then I think they say we're going out east.
We're going
Is that
out
what they
east.
say? Is that what they say?
Just before the Atlantic Ocean starts.
Yeah.
We're going to be surrounded by the Atlantic Ocean.
Our broadcast from the Hamptons next Friday.
Pretty cool stuff. Balance of Power starts right now.
This is Balance of Power, live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Tyler Kendall, I'm Joe Matthew.
Tonight, the clock ticks on potential U.S. military strikes against Iran.
It looked like I'm right about the material that they've gathered already. It's a tremendous amount of material. And I think within a matter of weeks, or certainly within a matter of months, they're going to be able to have a nuclear weapon. We can't let that happen.
One day after the president laid a timeline for his decision on whether or not to intervene militarily, more missiles are fired into Iran, hitting several points, causing injuries. As Iran's foreign minister warns against any diplomatic talks, what we can expect next as European ministers try to cool down the war.
Plus, the disruption to the U.S. workforce now being felt as the administration's ICE raids take hold in cities across the country. The economic fallout and the hundreds of billions on the line.
Also tonight, reports the Trump administration may revoke waivers for allies with chip plants in China, a prospect that impacted markets and threatened to dramatically escalate trade tensions.
And we're now T-minus 2 weeks until that self-imposed July 4th deadline for Congress to pass the president's long-promised tax bill. But with key sticking points remaining, how realistic is that deadline and where do lawmakers go from here?
Thanks for being with us this evening. We start tonight with tensions in the Middle East.